Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome to this public caucus. We've invited Geisinger in here this evening. I know that Councilman Schuster is on his way. I think he'll be here probably within the next few minutes, but I do want to welcome Ron Beer, Chief Administrative Officer for Geisinger Northeast, Renee Blakiewicz, Associate Vice President for Clinical Operations, and Dr. Steve Brunetti, the Medical Director for Geisinger. Obviously, this is our first chance as a council, as a whole, to hear from Geisinger about, we've asked them to come in and discuss some of their plans and what they're hoping to do should the zoning ordinance be passed. So we thought it was important to have them in for a public caucus, explain to all of us and the audience and the public as to exactly what the plans are. And then we're going to try our best to have a hard stop around 5:45 so that we can begin the public hearing. And that way the citizens will be able to comment about the upcoming zoning ordinance. So having said that, I'm going to turn it over to Ron Beer, the Chief Administrative Officer for Geisinger Northeast. I would ask everyone if you could please sit quietly while they do their presentation so that they can be heard and we can all hear what they have to say. And then we'll ask the same thing tonight when we begin the public hearing, that when each individual comes up to speak, please respect each individual while they're trying to, we want to hear everyone's input. Okay, thank you. Mr. Beer.
All right, thank you, Mr. King. Do we need to start with this? Want to present this? Do we need the presentation? Well, Mr. Voldenberg is teeing up the presentation. I just want to say thank you for allowing us to come in and talk a little bit about our plans, what we're looking to do in the city of Scranton. It's really an honor to be a part of the Scranton-Abington Planning Association's comprehensive plan. You know, we think that when this is complete, it's going to produce an overall vision for our future of not just Scranton, but all of the surrounding communities. We're really excited to be a part of it. We know we're a very small piece of that. But even though we're a small piece of it, we feel like we're a really important piece because we impact the quality of life in our community. Again, you know, when we look at the SAPA and the 9 municipalities that are included in the SAPA, that's our service area. Those are the families we take care of. Those are the patients we take care of. So we're looking forward to being a part of this, and we know that we can impact the quality of life in that area. GCMC has become a level 2 trauma center, and we truly become a regional referral center. We serve the tertiary referral needs of all of those 9 municipalities, all of the community, well outside of Lackawanna County. So as Mr. King had said, my name is Ron Beer. I'm the Chief Administrative Officer for Geisinger's Northeast region. I am actually joined today by 2 of my trusted colleagues, Renee Blakiewicz and Dr. Steve Brunetti. I'm going to turn it over to Renee to introduce herself, and then we'll turn it over to Dr. Brunetti to introduce himself.
Good evening. Thank you for having us. So Renee Blakiewicz.
Excuse me, Renee.
Sure.
And I'll ask all the speakers if you would pass the microphone so that,
Sorry.
and try to, do you notice I have my principal's voice? So please do that so everyone
I can do
hear
that.
you. Thank you.
So again, Renee Blakiewicz. I am the Associate Vice President for Clinical Operations. I've been at CMC for the past 30 years of my career. I went to CMC School of Nursing and worked as a nurse in the intensive care unit for many, many years. My role today is that of operations of the hospital, so I have an impact on what happens to the day-to-day operations within the facility, and it's been an honor to be there. Thank you.
My name is Stephen Brunetti. I'm a board-certified emergency medicine physician. I've been practicing emergency medicine for 25+ years, and I am not a Geisinger employee. Okay, my partners and I have been staffing CMC, the emergency department, since 1998. I am also the County 911 Center Medical Director. I've been in that position for many, many years. My role currently now is I manage our emergency medicine group and act as a liaison within Geisinger administration.
Great, thank you. Just briefly, the presentation we're going to show you tonight is similar to what we've presented to various stakeholders in a number of different meetings over the course of the last few years. We've updated and adjusted the content for relevance and time. We'll address the current state of healthcare in our community and the impact it's having to our friends and family. We'll address concerns over the land development process. We know there's been questions over the timing of impact studies, traffic studies, and things of that nature. And finally, we'll address the concerns that may have been raised to council throughout the formal process and the informal process. We can provide you copies of the presentation once we're through if you would like that. And we're going to save plenty of time at the end for questions and answers. So let me just start with this. This is our why slide. It's a little busy, but if you bear with me, we'll walk you through it. I think you've seen this slide before in different versions in different places, but it really illustrates the headwinds that are that we're pushing against in the healthcare industry. Right now, I'm sure you're hearing it from your police, from your fire, you're hearing it from your neighbors, you're hearing it from your friends. Each of you probably have a personal anecdote about the challenges you or a loved one have faced accessing healthcare over the last few years. There's a growing concern in the region about the stability of our healthcare market, and quite frankly, it's for good reason. Our market has significantly changed in the last several years. When we purchased Geisinger Community Medical Center, Scranton had 3 large hospitals. Our community hospitals were doing really well, and we had a 4th specialty hospital that joined the fold not long after that. Unfortunately, a number of really strong headwinds have changed the healthcare landscape forever. As a result, we've seen Tyler Hospital in Tunkhannock close. We've seen Berwick Hospital in Berwick close. We've seen Moses Taylor close. Regional Hospital and Wilkes-Barre General have reduced capacity. And First Hospital, the area's only behavioral health hospital, recently closed. The ripple effect has impacted our skilled nursing facilities. It's impacted our home health, our hospice, our transportation, and 911 services. At the same time, our demographics started to shift. Our population has been fairly stagnant for several years. We've seen about a 1.6% increase. Now, that doesn't take into consideration what we consider the COVID growth. We know that there's been a large influx of people who've moved in from the city as they started really coming in at the beginning of the pandemic. It's more of the COVID effect, the work from home effect, taking advantage of the quality of life of Pennsylvania. It's great to have those residents. Those numbers aren't showing up in some of our demographics yet. Our older population, though, those that are 65 and better, that population's increased by 15%. Unfortunately, when we get older, we consume more health care. So a 15% increase in an over 65 population disproportionately impacts the amount of health care that is consumed. The third leg of this stool is our aging infrastructure. At GCMC, we have roughly 2/3 of our beds are semi-private. At any given day, there's a small percentage of those beds that are blocked due to infectious disease isolation or other clinical indications that effectively reduce our capacity. Semi-private beds do lead to lower staff engagement, lower patient satisfaction, and have the potential to lead to overall negative clinical outcomes.
Ron, I'm going to stop you for a second. Is it possible to close that window? I mean, I know we probably need some air in here, but it's affecting at least my ability to hear. I don't know about anybody else's. Thank you.
You know, the parking garages are undersized and they're nearing the end of life. And the technology, the diagnostics, imaging support needed to supplement today's modern care teams are woefully inadequate, and the infrastructure to expand and upgrade and modernize those just doesn't exist. For those of you who've had an opportunity to tour the hospital recently, we pointed out the new CT that didn't fit into the existing CT gantry. We had to put it in a separate location. The culmination of significantly reduced capacity in the market, the increase in the clinical demand, and the aging infrastructure has created a perfect storm for our current healthcare crisis. We're consistently running in excess of 100% occupancy. That means every day we start the day with patients who are admitted to our hospital who need an inpatient bed, and they don't have one. They're in our hallways. We start every day with patients who have completed a surgery who need an inpatient bed, who are holding in our PACU. We routinely treat patients in our emergency room in the hallway, and we've now just started moving that care far forward into the waiting room so that we can get care in a timely fashion. We're going to go into more detail on a few of these items as we move along. We're seeing over 250 mental health crisis patients per month, many of which we can't place. With the loss of First Hospital, there is a lack of beds in the community, so many of these patients are waiting 12, 24, 48 hours or more, and when we do place them, unfortunately, we have to place them out of service area. And in some cases, that means we're taking an ambulance and a crew and taking a patient all the way across the state. Our admissions are up 6%, and our acuity is up even more than that, which means we're seeing more patients and we're seeing sicker patients. I'll now turn the presentation over to Dr. Brunetti, who will highlight how all of this impacts the ED at Geisinger Community Medical Center.
So this is a little bit of a busy slide, but I'm going to talk a little bit, before I go into the numbers on this slide, I want to talk about what the essence of emergency medicine is. And so probably everybody here, when we think of emergency medicine, we think of heart attacks, we think of stroke, I think of speed. So emergency medicine is all about speed. It's all about how quickly we can get the patient's head in the bed. Emergency medicine is not about emergency physicians. Emergency medicine is not about emergency nurses. The most precious resource that we have in emergency medicine is the bed. Without the bed, I cannot do anything. I cannot resuscitate you. I cannot even do a simple EKG to see if you're having a heart attack. That said, we take a look at some of these numbers. We have Moses Taylor, which is now closed. That's 32,000 annual patients that now have to be absorbed between Regional Hospital and Geisinger Community Medical Center. Now, Geisinger Community Medical Center, we were already at capacity. We were already seeing about 140 to 150 patients a day. That's double the capacity that our ER was built to handle. Since that emergency department closure of Moses Taylor, we've gone from 140, 150 a day, up to sometimes 180, 190 a day. When that happens, people wait. We cannot get them back to be seen. We cannot put that head in the bed. When we can't put the head in the bed, I can't treat you. When I can't treat you, patients wait. When patients wait, bad things happen. So from a non-Geisinger employee, from an advocate of emergency medicine and someone who's grew up in this community, who is supportive of expanding emergency services in the community, any health system, Geisinger Community Health Services, any health system that is looking to expand services within our community should be supported because it is desperately, desperately needed. Okay,
right. So beyond the emergency department, what happens? So our hospital is operating at 109% capacity and sometimes more on the inpatient side. So what does that mean? Well, that means that our beds are full. That means that every available space within the hospital is being utilized for patients. That means that patients in our emergency room are going to wait longer to get upstairs to us. So why is the volume increasing? We've talked a little bit about closures of hospitals. The market is changing. There's an increased demand for care, but there's also increased acuity of these patients. We have a sicker population coming to see us these days. We also have longer lengths of stay. It takes us a lot longer to get patients placed outside of the walls of the hospital because of their complexity. There's a demand for health care, and it's only going to continue to increase with our aging population, with the sicker population, and then with the loss of one of the city's emergency departments, we're going to see a massive increase in not only emergency room volume, but the patients that need to be admitted to our facilities. Next slide. So when we think about world-class care within the walls of Scranton, I cannot talk about this slide without being very happy and thrilled about the amazing team that we have at GCMC to take care of our patients. These folks come to work every day, and they strive for excellence in the care that we provide these patients, regardless of the demands and the volumes that they're seeing today. Our patients tell us, my nurse was great. They treated me with dignity and respect. Care was fantastic from the beginning to end. GCMC is the home of Lackawanna County's only trauma center and has been since 1989. We have had over 200 trauma activations on a monthly basis. So what does that mean? That means that we have a complex, critically injured or ill patient that's coming to our emergency room for care. That takes a whole lot of resources. A trauma activation brings many members of the team. So we have trauma surgeons, we have OR staff, we have ER staff, we have chaplains, we have ER nurses, and they all converge to care for this very complicated case. Sure.
So not all of you were privy, so Dr. Rothschild took a tour with me, okay, through the emergency department the other day. And she came through, and she witnessed exactly what we're trying to convey to you. Every hallway stretcher was filled. There was patients lying in stretchers, standing in hallways. The hallway that went out to the EMS bay was lined with ambulances waiting to unload stretchers. Now, when those ambulances are sitting in those hallways, they're not out in the community waiting to respond to your 911 emergencies. So in the midst of all that chaos, we got a pediatric trauma alert. So I took Dr. Rothschild into the pediatric bay, our one pediatric trauma bay in the entire county. Okay. It was the only bed that we had available for that patient. Now imagine if this was a multi-vehicle accident. Imagine if there was multiple patients in that car. Imagine if there was multiple pediatric patients in that car. Where would we have taken care of that patient? Where would we have put the second pediatric trauma that day? We didn't have any resources.
So now that we've talked about the why, now we get into a little bit of the what. And this all starts with strategy. So this has been an evolution. When we purchased the hospital, we knew we had to adapt. It was a well-functioning, well-respected level 2 trauma center, but we knew we had to adapt. And so we started embarking on a strategic plan. We evaluated the current demographics. We evaluated the disease burden, identified gaps in key service areas and providers. We aligned a clinical service plan to leverage regional and system capabilities. We worked with a team of experts to overlay the current facility portfolio on top of that strategic plan. We were looking specifically for quantity and quality. Do you have enough of fill in the blank? ORs, rooms, pediatric trauma rooms, et cetera. And the ones that you do have, are they big enough? Are they technologically advanced enough? Are they in the right spot? Do they have the right adjacencies? When we were done with all of that, that kind of laid out where our work needed to begin. And then we had to prioritize. A key consideration and a core tenet of our vision is we want to make better health easier. It's more than just a tagline. So we started moving as much as we could out of CMC, out of those four walls, pushing it into the community to make it easy and accessible. And we're going to talk about some of those. And then once we had a working document, we really prioritized, and we came up with these 6 key priorities. The first one was always replace and expand the emergency room. The second one, private beds. I can't stress to you how important it is to have private beds in today's environment. We wanted to modernize and expand our diagnostic imaging. Scranton needed, our community needed a comprehensive cancer center, a one-stop shop. We needed to establish medical office buildings to grow these programs, to grow these physician practices. On the GCMC campus right now, the only place for a clinical program, an outpatient clinical program to grow is in a multi-specialty clinic that's embedded in the hospital. The professional office building, which used to be the old school of nursing, is not, it won't meet code for a current clinical occupancy. We only use it for offices, nor would it be big enough to accommodate a modern practice anyway. And finally, expand psychiatric and behavioral health. This was a priority before First Hospital closed. And so it became an even more important priority since then. Renee, you want to take us through what we've done to accomplish those?
So to Ron's point, we continue to move services out of the hospital walls in order to create additional space for patients. This slide just shows a couple locations that we have at the moment where we've opened or are opening just to accomplish that task. These services can operate independently, and that's an important point. They can operate without the need to be an acute care facility. Moving an emergency room out of a trauma center takes the patient away from needed care, an OR, a cath lab. We got to have those services together. This is an acute care, critical care facility. We look at this slide, and you see our medical office building on Olive Street growing. We have our Geisinger Orthopedics in the Steamtown Mall. We have our behavioral health hospital in Music, which is going to be a 96-bed inpatient hospital that will accommodate adolescents, which is not in this area today. Our kids are going to Pittsburgh or Philadelphia if they need inpatient behavioral health care. Our cancer center, and then Geisinger Mount Pleasant. Next slide. So as we move services off campus, we continue to look at the structure of GCMC, right? So we're looking at our emergency room. That ED was built for half of the volume that we're seeing today. So what does that look like? Patients are being treated in hallways, offices, waiting rooms. CMC is 2/3 semi-private. Consider this. A physician has to come in and tell you something very sensitive, and your neighbor is going to hear exactly what he says to you about your cancer diagnosis or whatever he's going to tell you that you wouldn't want others to hear. We need to upgrade our imaging. CMC houses the oldest MRI in the system. I think it's about 17 years old at this point. We worked really hard to find space for it, but guess what? There wasn't. We had to move a service out to create space for a new MRI. That is still not at CMC just yet. Parking. Parking here is an enabling project only. It is not the project. This is a clinical expansion. That's what we're looking for. We need to expand parking in the sense that it's going to allow us to create clinical space.
So as you can see, as part of our strategic planning, we worked really hard to come up with alternative solutions. We spent a lot of time trying to figure out what needed to be on the campus of GCMC. We moved those outpatient services to locations that were better suited, easier to get to, easier to access, that had complementary services. The orthopedic investment we made in Steamtown, is a prime example. It is a center of excellence where it's a one-stop shop: orthopedic, sports medicine, podiatry, physical and occupational therapy. We can put it all there. It's easy in, easy out, easy parking. It made a lot of sense to go down there. Our primary care, move it out to Mount Pleasant. The Olive Street, that allowed us to grow specialty programs that didn't exist in Scranton prior to us coming in. We've been able to continue to invest in specialty and subspecialty services that, again, don't need to be in the hospital. We've maximized the space in the hospital, and we're now at a spot where we have to actually come to you for the rezoning because we still have 3 key priorities we have to address. Right? So this is kind of an example. You've seen the presentations, you've seen the images. We didn't want to rehash those. This is just a nice, simple summary of what we're looking at. The big orange box with the 3 X's, that's probably the most important one to focus on. That's the clinical expansion. We've spent the least amount of time on that in conversations because that seems to be the one area that the conversation doesn't always go to, but it is the reason we're here today. When we look at the blocks to either side, on the 300 block or the 200 block on the left, that's an area where we're looking at putting structured parking, and the 200 block on the right is an area to look at structured parking. Again, as Renee said, parking is an enabling project. It allows us to actually move all of our parking off to the side, frees up those aging parking garages that we have that are undersized, and then we can start thinking about how expansion looks on across the 300 block of Colfax. Now, when we've gone through this, there's been multiple evolutions of this as we've talked to different stakeholders, as we've talked to neighbors, as we've received input. And the stakeholders are our neighbors, our elected officials, our clinical teams, and there's a lot of reasons why we continue to shift about where we're going to put it. You know, one of the things that we talk a lot about is adjacencies. When that emergency patient hits that door, in a perfect world, we want to be able to treat them in the trauma bay that Dr. Brunetti talked about, take them right to the OR, right to the ICU. Time is critical when it comes to these trauma patients. If we put those clinical services across the street and we have to take them up over a bridge, down to the OR, then up to the ICU, it becomes a real challenging patient flow issue. Through conversations with our clinical team, they highlighted some of the challenges of putting clinical services in that location. When we talked to the neighbors, they highlighted, hey, this looks like sprawl. There's a lot of activity that goes on at the hospital. Now you're going to move that across 2 additional blocks. Is there a way you can consolidate it? And so we said, well, let's take a look at it. And so we pulled it all back together. And we said, if we take all of the high-intensity activity and we put it in the 300 block, and then we put parking garages in the 200 and the 400 block, that's going to be quieter for the neighbors. It's going to be quieter for the neighborhood. All of that high-intensity activity will stay where the existing hospital's at. And so we re-looked at our design. So this is an evolution of multiple conversations over the last couple of years to get us to this spot.
So upcoming opportunities, things we need to address, right? So we're here today to talk about zoning and understand that we know that land development is really guided by state law and what the next steps of this will be. Zoning, step 1. And then we have opportunity to talk a little bit further about civil studies, land development plans, address the noise, light, traffic, safety, the aesthetics of the building. We're committed to build a neighbor advisory board to help address and discuss this work collectively and collaboratively. We need to do this together.
So we're going to have a test on this when we're done. So if everybody go ahead and take some notes on this. This was actually a pretty eye-opening for me as well. This is your typical land development process in Pennsylvania. The only reason why we wanted to show this is to show that we're at the very beginning, right? And so when we go through, a lot of times we're challenged on, do you have more complete plans? You have to be thinking about something different. There has to be more to it. The reality is there can't be. You know, when on a typical project, architectural and engineering fees can run you anywhere from 3 to 4% on a typical $200 to $300 million project. That can be $12 million. If we were to invest even half of that and then come to zoning and find that we didn't have the right setbacks, the right easements, the right anything, that's money that's just a sunk cost. It didn't make sense to invest in really detailed drawings this early in the process. So as you can see, we're right at the very beginning. Zoning sets everything. It gives us the setbacks. It gives us the permeable space. It gives us the height. From there, we can move into true land use development. This will be a 12 to 18 month project to get us through land development. But what that does is that's when we start to do all of those civil studies. And we've made a commitment to our neighbors. We're going to look at light. We're going to look at noise. We're going to look at traffic patterns because it's in all of our best interest. Right now, there's a really annoying beeping on our garage, a really annoying beeping. And I think if I took a poll of everybody behind me, they'd all say, hallelujah, Ron. Absolutely. But the reason it's there is because we don't want a pedestrian to get hit. And the way our parking garage is set up, as a car comes out, you have to be on the sidewalk before you can see left or right. That beeping is the only thing that keeps our pedestrians safe. That's our staff, that's our family members, that's our guests. So we agree, we don't want that beeping, but that requires us to design something different, to separate pedestrians and traffic in some meaningful way. Talk about light. There's some concerns about how light actually infiltrates people's homes. Okay? That's the kind of stuff that we want to fix ourselves. We've got parking garages where we have programs where we have LED lights. If you go to Pittston and you go to our community practice, as you drive in, the lights come on, and as you go by, the lights go off. It's energy efficient, but it also reduces light pollution. In addition to that, we want to do some shade and sun studies. The last thing we want to do is impact somebody's quality of life while we're trying to fix the quality of life. That's an oxymoron. What we want to do is we want to make sure that we are not impacting people's ability to enjoy their yards, to enjoy their gardens. That's going to require some sunshade studies of things of that nature. All of that comes later in the process. And most of those we're required to do. Some of them we're going to do because it's just the right thing to do. It makes sense. So the last piece of this, we wanted to go through and we wanted to address a number of concerns that have come up, either to council or to us directly, to some cases during our community events, our conversations with our neighbors. And so what we've done is we've kind of bucketed them, and we hope to be able to address most of them now. So one of the main ones that I think comes up more times than not is the 200 block. And so, part of the rezoning question is the 200 block is taller, it's 100 feet max, and the 400 block is 45 feet. One of the biggest challenges is it's a shorter block. And so when we look at our parking count, we look at what we need to replace where we're at, and when we look at what we think we're going to need going forward, that was how we were able to get the right parking count with some room to grow. We don't have a ton of room to grow parking, but it allows us to give some room to grow. Essentially, the 200 block is the same size as our parking garage, essentially, the one that's there now. The 400 blocks are roughly the same size as the old Audubon School. Our goal was to try to mirror that height so that we didn't have any additional impact to the community, yet still hit our parking count. Impact on property values. One of the things that we've done is we've gone through and we've looked at, are we having a negative impact on property values? And the data would suggest something different. When we looked at the MLS listings over the last 5 years, the Hill section is a really vibrant community. The property values have grown well over about 120%. So the hospital has been there for multiple decades. The hospital is a vibrant part of that community, always has been, always will. It has not impacted the property values of the Hill section prior, and we don't believe it'll impact the property values of the Hill section post either. We think a thriving, growing community hospital will enhance the property values of the community. Relocating services, we talked about this to downtown. We have moved as much as we can downtown. We have tried to do everything we possibly can to get outpatient services, high volume traffic services out of the core of the hill section, try to get them downtown, try to get them to other parts of the community, make them convenient for people who are going to be accessing them. So we've worked really hard on that. What is left is the critical components of a trauma center, the pieces that have to go together. So anything that now leaves that building, they all have to go together because they are integral. And when you think about that, and you think about that pediatric patient that Dr. Brunetti talked about, the ER was only a piece of that. The imaging, the OR, the ICU, all of those pieces then intertwine to provide that best care for that patient. Taxus and pilot is another one that people talk about. They talk about the tax roll taking off 25 houses off a tax roll. One of the things that most people don't realize about a nonprofit hospital is we have an economic impact of about $600 million in direct and indirect every year. That's the type, so when the folks come to work, they stop and they get gas. After work, they go to they drop off their dry cleaning, they get their hair cut. They spend the money in our community. In 2021, GCMC provided more than $74 million in community benefits. In addition to that, including uncompensated care and community assistance. We support a lot of other nonprofits and we make the investments because we believe that being a good neighbor is more than just being a good neighbor. It's investing in services for folks. There's a lot of social determinants of healthcare. We spend a lot of time talking about that because by the time you develop congestive heart disease, right, there's a lot of things that contributed to that. And a lot of those things are social determinants. They're things that we invest in. So we invest in programs that help that. We invest in nonprofits that actually work to make sure that there's no food deserts in Scranton, to make sure that there's transportation, to make sure that there's services available. All right, let me send this over to Renee if you want to talk about a few more of these.
Sure. So one of the other areas that comes up frequently is communication with neighbors. We had a large community meeting in April of 2022, and we heard a lot of concerns at that point with regards to the expansion. There was a lot of worry, and we understood that, and through that, we were able to make some decisions like the consolidation over the 300 block, which made the most sense. At that point, we developed a phone line, like a hotline for concerns for neighbors. We also put an email address together that they can communicate with us through that. One of the things we also did is we have weekly internal meetings to talk about what concerns were raised, what can we do about it, are there questions that need to be answered, are there events or things that are going to happen that are going to be disruptive within the neighborhood, community, residential area, and do we need to communicate that? We also got together again in September to have a little bit more focused conversation. And at that point, we were asked for some renderings. And so we were able to get basically blocks on a page in order to just to show conceptually what this could look like. We did share that with the neighbors, and we did share that with many others. We also, there was a walk around that occurred in November with folks just to take a look at spaces that we would not consider developing into a building, but more of green space parcels around the hospital and across the street from the 400 block Colfax parking garage. We are, again, committed to forming this committee. I think it's incredibly important that we have conversations together and really look at the studies together and see what needs to be done in order to expand the hospital, but create this comfortable environment that we both can rely on each other in. So potential to expand elsewhere if the zoning is revised. So we want to stay in Scranton. Scranton is where many of us grew up. This hospital's been there for over 100 years. It has grown. We have done amazing things and saved many, many lives in Scranton and beyond. It is our priority to have this conversation with you all in this community and have the ability to rezone this area and expand this hospital, this is where we want to be. From a financial performance perspective, Geisinger is incredibly innovative, and they do a lot of amazing work when it comes to thinking outside of the box and how do we care for patients in an innovative fashion. And so, well, yes, everybody has financial concerns, and yes, every healthcare entity is struggling. Yes, that is a true statement. We are working towards excellent care, providing access to our patients, and that is going to help us move things along with regards to healthcare quality within Scranton and in this community.
Mr. King, we've tried to be as transparent and open as we can about our strategy, about addressing some of the challenges, some of the issues and concerns that have come to council's attention. And at this point, we're open to questions from council.
Okay, I'm going to go around the dais the way that we typically do in our meetings. So I'll ask Mr. Smurl if you have any questions at this time.
Yes, Mr. King, I do have some questions. My first question is, how many ER rooms are existing at GCMC today?
38.
38. And if the expansion was approved, well, if the zoning ordinance was approved, how many do you expect to add ER rooms?
I haven't seen the design.
Yeah. So one of the things, when we showed the map, we talk about where we're at with the process. What will happen was once we get approval for zoning, we'll start in what we call programming. So when we look at the demographics, we look at what's changed in the market, and we start backing our way into that number, trying to figure out how many ERs we need, how many trauma bays we're going to need, and then as we start to do that, that starts to feed the inpatient rooms, it feeds the ORs. So it becomes somewhat of a math exercise, but it all starts with making sure that we understand the current demographics as they exist today, not 3 years ago when we started the process, but today. So we don't have a number on what that number will be, but what we can tell you is 38 is not enough. It's woefully inadequate. Most likely there will be at least 3, if not 4 trauma bays. That's probably consistent with our volume, and there may be an additional one. Again, all suspect at this point. It all needs to be verified and validated with the existing patient and disease load.
So you say, before you said there would be between 12 and 18 months of just developing the land to get a layout for the land. So how long do you think this project would be? Is this a 5-year, a 10-year project? And when you're looking at, if it's 7 or 8 years away, are you looking at adding, doubling your ER size now to prepare for something in the future? Is that, and how do you get to that point?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because, so the land use development is a 12 to 18 month process. And we can run programming in parallel with that. So we know the size, the max size of building we could get on that space. You know, then we can actually start doing things in parallel. While we're going through doing all of the traffic studies, we're doing all of the civil studies, we're working on our programming. So at the same time, you know, we're lining up all of our design work. So you figure 18 months for land development, maybe another 6-8 months of just finalizing design. We're putting a shovel in the ground, let's just say in 2 years. And then we're building it out over 2 years. So maybe your 5-year time horizon is accurate. So what do we do to get us to 5 years? Part of it is leveraging regional assets. So we've been able to do this work and expand in Luzerne County. We have new assets, new capabilities coming online frequently. We just opened some new spaces. We're constantly looking at how do we reevaluate what we currently have. That multi-specialty clinic that we talked about that's inside the hospital, we're looking at how do we incorporate that? How do we build out our urgent care capacity for a pop-off valve? How do we continue to expand our primary care base so that we can offload some of the ER work? So part of our strategy is immediate. how do we take care of the population today? And again, that's continued investment and utilizing our regional capacity. And then the long term is a final solution for Scranton, which includes the expanded emergency room, expanded inpatient bed capability, and upgraded radiology and imaging. Did that answer your question, sir?
Pretty close.
Yeah.
The other, what you had said before, there's a big concern, there always has been, communication between the neighbors and GCMC. You had stated before that you do have a dedicated number. Is there a dedicated person for community connection between, do you have a liaison between the actual neighbors and GCMC to all your properties in this area? Or how do I call you and say, I have a problem with something on the right corner of the
Yep.
ER?
Yep, we have a dedicated, we do have a dedicated line, and there is an individual that answers those messages for us. And
How
then
is that
he'll share
advertised? How do you advertise that? How would I know that?
So they made, when the line was first put together and the email was first put together, these individuals went door to door and handed out flyers to folks if there were any issues that they can communicate directly with them. We've had neighbors actually come to the house, to the administrative house, and my card has been handed out as well, with my cell phone number that is on that card. So folks can get a hold of me as well, and have.
So if I were to call GCMC, I go on my phone and I push GCMC, I get a switchboard?
You would, yes.
And do I get a list of people who I would be looking for? And say, a community relations person, is that?
Yes.
That is listed in your,
Yes.
in your list?
Yes.
Okay. When you're making your exterior design for the exterior, how do you plan on having, if you plan on having the neighbors involved in the actual look of the property, the actual exterior design? Interior, pretty much, that's totally yours. But on the exterior that people have to look at,
Sure.
how would you involve the neighbors into that stage?
Well, I think the first order of business is to create this advisory committee, board, whatever the case may be.
Sorry.
That's okay. So we would create this advisory board first, right? And I think we need to understand each other a little bit better. So there'd be a lot of conversation. The goal is going to be transparency here, and should be and is. We need to talk about what the building needs to look like, and then I want to share and share alike. So we'll get design and then share and see what is liked best, what looks best, what's going to blend into the community better.
Okay. And I also believe someone from the city, from the zoning department, or someone should be involved every step of the way
Sure.
between
Sure.
you and the neighbors.
Yes.
I have one final thing. How many parking spots are you looking at in your development?
So in the new parking garages, we're looking at approximately 1,675.
1,675? All right. That's all I have for now. I thank you for attending
Sure.
and answering my questions. Mr. King?
Thank you, Mr. Smurl. Mr. Schuster's not here. I'll ask Dr. Rothschild if she has any questions or comments.
I do. I have a lot of questions, so I'll try to be quick with them. Some of them have already been answered, so forgive me as I sort through this. But thank you for coming tonight. I really felt like it was important to have you here tonight for the caucus, so that we could hear from you, the public could hear from you about your potential plans with the expansion, and because we still did have so many lingering questions as well. So the largest point of contention seems to be with the height of the building on the 200 block of Colfax now. Is there a reason why that can't be reduced a few stories and parking continue into NAIOG?
So when we look at the numbers of parking spaces that we have available today, with the two existing garages, the parking in NAIOG, a lot that we use in Dunmore, that gives us about 1,400 spaces. If we decrease the size of the garage to replicate what we have on the 400 block, we will be worse than we are today. So it will exacerbate the parking issues in Scranton around CMC, for sure.
Okay, and will you be looking into the possibility of going down into the ground?
Yeah, I think we have to look at all possibilities. Yep.
And will the garage be tiered, or?
Yeah, one of the things that, as we go through the process, we know there's bedrock under there, we just don't know where it's at. We don't know how, what it's composed of. So as part of our engineering studies, when we start that land use, we'll be figuring out how deep we can go. If it requires blasting, obviously I don't think our neighbors will want us to do a whole lot of that. But we would love to go as deep as we could, especially, there's quite a bit of a drop-off on the 200 block, from street to street. From Linden to Roslyn, there's a pretty significant drop-off. And then even on the 400 block, as you come from Oka Court over to Colfax. So ideally, if we could dig down and put a level or 2 levels or anything underground, that would be an ideal scenario. And the tiering that you mentioned, so a lot of what's going to really guide this is going to be some of those sunshade, those light studies, and so, as we start to get to the edge of the Roslyn side of the 200 block, we're going to want to make sure that building steps back, and it steps back in a way that we're not, permanently shadowing the front yards of the folks there on Roslyn. All of that will come, will be informed through the studies and then through the design work that'll come after that.
Okay, and do you have a percentage of the building that, I know you've spoken before about the aesthetics of the building and maybe using brick or some more aesthetically pleasing materials to fit better in with the neighborhood. So do you have a percentage of how much brick would be on these garages versus concrete?
No, I do not. That'll come during the design work. I think one of the things, like our current employee garage looks brick. It's actually pressed concrete. There's a lot they can do with building materials now. So when we're at that stage of design and we go out for bid, there are companies out there doing some amazing work. So, the material will really be determined by what we're trying to accomplish, what the structural integrity of the material is, what's available at the time. When we started looking for other projects, pressed concrete, there was such a the poured concrete was such a lag time that, we switched companies because we weren't able to get it in time. So a lot of it's going to be dependent on what's available at the time when we start to build also. There's a lot of variables that'll go into that.
Okay, and I know noise has been also talked a lot about, and the beeping, that would drive me crazy too. I can't handle if a timer at work goes off, it needs to be shut off immediately. So I understand that you don't expect to have that beeping with the new garages because they'll be set back further to allow for vehicular traffic and those wider pedestrian sight lines. But I'm wondering about other noise factors, like with loud equipment and the construction over the course of several years, right?
So one of the things that, certainly during construction, they will adhere to the city's noise ordinances. We will ensure that. And that'll be part of the contractual obligation of the company, of the CM that we utilize. And the CMs that we've been utilizing in projects across our footprint have done a really nice job of making sure that they adhere to local municipalities' regulations when it comes to that. I'm not concerned about that. When we get to the spot where we're designing to minimize the impact, one of the challenges we have when you look at Linden, especially between Arthur and Colfax, there's a lot of activity on that street, and a lot of it requires trucks to back up, and when trucks back up, they beep for safety. So there's constant noise back and forth, filling the oxygen, bulk oxygen, picking up dumpsters, doing things like that. Part of what we're going to try to do with this design is to figure out a way to be able to minimize that disruption, minimize that noise, which means there's got to be a way to get the trucks to pull in and do the things that they need to do without excessive backing. And if they do have to back up, then how do we shield that noise in some way so we're not being disruptive? What you have today is an evolution of 50-plus years of adding and subtracting and adjusting. What we want to do now is purposely build this new addition so that we can eliminate some of those pain points. The beeping on the garage, I agree with you 100%, Dr. Rothschild. It is annoying, and we want to be able to solve that. And we think we can solve that just by designing the entry points for the garage to allow people to have visibility left and right before they're on the sidewalk, and then separating pedestrian and vehicular traffic.
Okay. And do you plan on there being adequate landscaping around the buildings to better fit in with the neighborhood as well?
Yeah, so one of the things that, just around the buildings, landscaping is a finale. You have to have good landscaping. With good landscaping, you can really soften some of the hard lines. And I think we looked at one of those areas on the side of the visitor's garage, where we're looking at that 15-foot setback, and we had really nice trees and plants in there. It really softened the existing garage. We're looking at also adding green space, so in places where we've taken a home down, but we don't intend to utilize that space, we want to turn that into park space. However, if it's a pocket park, if it's a dog park, again, that's where we're going to use that community, that advisory council for. We want them to tell us what we need to do with that space. So there will end up being a significant amount of green space, and all of those hard structures will be landscaped in to the extent we can, to include some green roofs.
Since you bring up the advisory council, I'm wondering if there will also be a community benefits agreement, because I think the concern is even if there's an advisory council and if neighbors are involved with that they still might not be heard in what their opinions or suggestions are that you might choose to still go another way. And so if there's a benefits agreement that would be able to hold to, okay, this is the planned height, this is what we promised you for the amount of brick on the building or the facade or the amount of landscaping or setbacks, I feel like those things would be helpful in those concerns.
Yeah, I think that'd be really challenging to put on paper right now, being this early in the process. I would assume that the zoning probably has a lot of that already built into it. But, again, kind of going back to we've been here for a number of years. We've been a part of the community. We've been a fabric of Scranton. We intend to be here for another 100 years. We want to make sure that we fit into the community. We develop that relationship, that trust, and what we say we do, we do. And if we can't do it, we explain it. And if we can't explain it, then maybe we need to think about why we're doing it or why we're not doing it. There's going to be a million changes that happen from today to the time we put a shovel in the ground. There'll be a million changes that happen from the time we put a shovel in the ground till the time we open the building, just because of the landscape. Construction inflation alone is up about 15%. So if that comes down, we can do other things. If that goes up, we may have to we may have to adjust some of the stuff that we're doing. Again, all of that has to be communicated, has to be shared. I think having somebody from the city, having zoning on that community advisory council is a wonderful idea. I think having the neighbors there engaged in that dialogue is the right thing to do. But actually, memorializing things like what exactly we're going to build before we've had a chance to design it would be a little bit problematic.
Okay, well, the community benefits agreements are pretty common, so I would encourage that to be developed or worked on with the advisory council.
Sure.
I think that's something that's important. You could figure out what, along with the neighbors, what would be appropriate to be in there, but I would really like to push for that.
Okay.
And then I know this is something that I asked you before, but will employees have to pay for the new garage, and why are they currently paying for the employee garage that you have now?
Yeah. You want to take that one?
So currently, there's a 2-year waiting list to get into the employee parking garage. And they do pay at this point. to park in the employee parking garage. You know, we have done everything we can possibly do to free up space in that garage to decant NAOG Park and stop folks from parking within the community, but it has been a challenge to say the least. But yeah, they do pay.
And that money does not go into operations, that goes into foundation. It's more of just a mechanism to help control that 2-year wait list. When we have enough parking, nobody's going to pay. One of the first things we did when we purchased CMC was we eliminated parking for patients and visitors.
Okay, because I'd hate to have to see employees employees pay to park in the new garage, and so then they're parking in the park anyway, which is
Right.
what we're trying to avoid, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And then is Geisinger's ED fully staffed?
Is the what, I'm sorry?
Is the ED fully staffed?
So I think one of the biggest challenges we have in healthcare, and I'm not even going to say in Scranton or in Pennsylvania, in healthcare, is an adequate number of staff. Over the course of the pandemic, it's literally been a death by 1,000 cuts when it comes to staffing. We've had a number of, and we're talking from the physician level to the nurses to phlebotomists, CT techs, you name it, everything it takes to run a hospital. We've had some challenges getting the adequate staffing. A lot of folks left our workforce. A lot of folks have taken jobs where they can work from home to be reviewers, to do things like that. There's been really sizable money that has been offered for travel nurses. People have been able to, and in some cases, they've taken travel assignments and literally drove down the road to regional, and regional's nurses have taken travel assignments and came up and worked for us. The entire labor market has been turned upside down throughout the pandemic. We're starting to see that normalize now. We've actually seen some really impressive retention numbers. We're getting back to where we were at pre-pandemic in terms of retention. We've got some really good positive momentum on recruitment. We have some of our larger nurse recruiting classes coming in. We're investing in some local programs to help generate that next generation of healthcare providers. We actually invest in programs that go as deep in schools as junior high and high school. We want them to see that there's a future. We want them to see that that future is healthcare, and there's a path forward for healthcare. And so when people come and they join our organization, if they want to go back to school, we have a path to help them go back to school. If they are uncomfortable with where they're at in terms of their writing, their reading, their basic skill set, if it's been a decade or two since they went to school, we have a program called School at Work, where we actually help them stabilize that foundation so that they can go on and get some advanced clinical degrees. We do a number of things to establish that connection, to keep people in healthcare, to bring people in healthcare. On the physician side, we do the same thing. Our medical school, we actually have a program called Abigail Scholars, where we're using community investment to actually help these kids go to school, get a 4-year medical degree, and it's free as long as they come back and work in our community as a primary care physician. It's a tremendous program. That was the promise of the medical school. The promise of the medical school was to make sure that we had physicians in the future. We're starting to realize that promise. These kids in those first few classes are starting to come back now. The Abigail Scholarship Program will continue to encourage them to come back and work in our community and be a part of our medical community.
Okay, it's good to know that there's a pipeline, but I'm wondering with the new ED in the future, then how would those concerns be corrected? Like, do you feel like it'll be more attractive for employees to work there then with updated technology and more room for patients or?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think an important component, we'll take you back to what Dr. Brunetti said, the most important piece in that emergency room, the most critical piece is the bed. So regardless of the staffing, patients do not wait because of staffing. Patients are waiting because of space right now. And so as we expand or have the ability to expand, we're going to be able to bring in more technology. We're going to have access to radiology right in the department. That's a goal, right? So staff are not going to be in that, while ERs are chaotic to the extent that you saw, it's just not, it doesn't function well, right? People are doing what they can to take care of patients in chairs, to get people in front of physicians as quickly as possible, and that sometimes is a chair or a stretcher in the hallway or whatever the case may be. So the reality of staffing is a true problem, yes, but the space is more valuable, and I don't want to say that. The space is what is needed to recruit and bring people into the building.
Just take it down to a real granular story this weekend. So if any of you were, happen to be a patient within our emergency department, we saw over 180 some patients on one of the days in the emergency department. There was a wait time of up to 8 hours to come back and be seen by one of our ER physicians and ER nurses. Our physicians were standing there waiting to see people with nothing to do because every bed was occupied. Every bed was filled. Our ER nurses, completely fully staffed, but we still could not bring anybody back. Over that one day and one weekend, we had 11 patients walk out not seen. What happened to them? Did they have a bad outcome? We don't know. And the sickest, the most dangerous patient in the emergency department is the patient that you don't know is that sick. So that's a real-life example. It's not staffing, it's bed capacity. Without the beds, we cannot do anything.
So do you know how many beds there are currently?
38.
38. How many beds are in the proposed?
So they asked that prior to stepping in, so it's indeterminate yet. They have to do a feasibility study, population, demographics.
I have just one more question, then we'll move on so the other council members can ask theirs. There's been a lot of talk about the potential for an expanded pediatric unit and services. So I'm wondering what you service as of now with your pediatrics, and where does that fit in with this plan? Because there's obviously a need within the community, and I've received calls from concerned parents about that. And so I'd like to hear more of what you have planned for that.
So I think along the same the same lines that we talked with Councilman Spurl, the programming is going to be really key with this. So when we started this journey, back in 2019, it was a very, very different landscape. We knew what we needed, and we knew where our focus was. We reactivated a shuttered OB program, and we built it out as a nurse midwife program. And we did that very strategically because Moses Taylor had the market. They were by far the most, I don't want to use the word dominant, but that they were the program. That was the place to go if you're going to have a baby. So we created the niche for that to supplement. Fast forward 3 years, all of this has now changed. The entire women's and children's market looks different. And so when we go through the programming, that's part of what we'll be looking at. How do we readjust our plans? Do we need to add to? Do we need to subtract from? How do we make the adjustment for this new reality of a greatly expanded need for women's services and an absolute greatly expanded need for pediatrics? That'll be a really key part of the programming.
Okay, thank you.
So Dr. Rothschild.
Thank you, Dr. Rothschild.
It has to be. Pediatric emergency services, the resources to do a resuscitation for a pediatric patient. We've lost 24 beds with Moses Taylor going down. So we need that capacity, or our patients are going to suffer.
Mr. McAndrew?
Yes, thank you all for coming. And I truly believe that, you are for the advancement of medicine and better medicine and expanding services. Jesus, I'm 60, so I'm going to need a lot of them sooner than later. But I have questions. And I want to state that being for compromise is not being against advancement. or expansion. I just want that clear. So you mentioned earlier about studies, and we've been asking about studies, and you refer to them as civic studies, and that's fine. That's the lighting, the traffic studies, the noise pollution. And you've confirmed to us that they're not going to happen until some type of zoning's passed and land development begins. Correct? Right. Okay, so with that said, and we touched a little bit on underground parking, and that's the question I have. So, okay, you didn't do them studies, but did you explore or do any studies related to underground parking, like the reservoir space, the requirements, feasibility, and such? Because you did mention earlier that, well, maybe if we hit a little rock, we might go a little deeper. But when you say that, I mean, do you mean, are you going to go as deep as, say, okay, so the compromise, obviously, from the hill is 100 feet to 45. Right. And to me, that's the distance between me and this wall. That doesn't look like, a huge ask, and I don't see, I mean, you're saying it might affect the freeing up of space to provide other services or adequate services. But my question lies, did you really take a deep dive about going underground versus going up?
No, as I mentioned before, we've not done any of those studies yet. Everything starts with zoning, and once we know what our zoning is, what our setbacks are, what our height restrictions, what our permeable space is, and then we'll contract with our engineers, we'll contract with our civil firms to go in and start doing all of those studies, making sure that what's underneath there, how deep can we go, what's feasible, what's not feasible, is there a water table issue? All of that requires a significant investment in time and resources, an investment that doesn't make sense to make until we know if we're going to have the right zoning or not.
So an architect didn't even take that's not even his or her thought process at this time.
No, we have to do some geosamples. We have to get in there and actually find out what's there and do a lot. That's where one of our civil engineering firms would come in and help us out. We do believe that there's rock under there. We ran into some rock before with the expansion. But there's a lot of work that has to be done to make sure that what we're building is environmentally sustainable, it's not disruptive, it doesn't have any inadvertent ripple effects. As you were saying, if we get too deep and you find water table issues, all of that comes through the civil environmental studies.
Okay, thank you. So my next question, so earlier on you had a line item on there about pilots and taxes.
Yes, sir.
So clarify to me, because I wish I had a copy of today's PowerPoint, because you went through them too quick. I'd like to refer back to them. Yep. So I'm trying to remember the $74 million number you referred to as community benefits. Was that since 2021, or was that 21's number? And that $74 million community benefit, was that all of Geisinger and its communities, or is that Scranton?
That's Scranton, and that's a 21 number. What we can do is we can get you the breakdown of that. We can show you what that is. Significant portion of that's uncompensated care. And then there's a significant portion of that we're making investments back into the community. Everything from, supporting, as I mentioned, supporting nonprofit programs to ensure that we don't have food deserts, to supporting things like the half marathon, supporting nonprofits that are providing transportation for oncology patients. So the investments we make
I would ask everyone to please allow Mr. Beer to speak, and we're going to do the same when everyone else has an opportunity to speak. Thank you.
But the investments we make in our community, plus the uncompensated care, that's what comes up to that $74 million number.
So, well, thank you for that and your generosity. So that was 21's number. Could, like you said you offered, would you provide council as a whole 22's number, 23's number, and a better breakdown than what you've explained? Like, I'd like to know what you've championed for us
Absolutely.
in the city and
Yep,
outside the
absolutely.
marathon
We
and
can share
everything
with you. Yep.
Thank you. I think that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McAndrew. Mr. Schuster?
Thank you. So I know I came in on the end of this, but is any of the design work complete as of now?
No, sir.
So you haven't done any
No,
design
sir.
work for
We've
these
done-
several blocks?
No, we've done very preliminary. One of the things is we were meeting with the neighbors, one of the reoccurring asks was, we really need to understand what this looks like. Can you do some sort of rendering, some sort of drawing? So we put together literally blocks on a page. We had some artist renderings of what a garage might look like to show that they can actually look like commercial buildings. They don't have to look like, the formed concrete. And so we showed those. And then the rest of it was just kind of proportional blocks on a page. We have not invested in any substantial design work.
Okay, so I asked a little bit about the beds, but
Yeah.
right now we were talking parking garages and we were talking amount of parking spaces. Do the amount of beds, do they directly correlate with the amount of parking spaces?
Most of what we're starting to see is a lot of the work we're doing at Shift. There are some planning factors on what we need. We're seeing a lot. We still have a significant amount of outpatient surgery that we see. There's still some of that in and out. Our staffing is different than other hospitals given the complexity and the acuity of our patients, so that requires some additional staff. But there are benchmarks that are guidelines. So we can, I don't know, Renee, do you have any additional details on that?
So there are calculations that are done based on the amount of inpatient beds and how many parking spaces are allocated to those. We can certainly share that. I don't have it in front of me, but yeah, we have that.
Yeah, I feel like I've been given an exact number on parking spaces, but just not an exact number on everything else when it comes to this project. So I don't know where we're deriving the numbers for parking spaces at if we don't know how many beds or how much of actual hospital space we're
Yeah,
talking.
we can share the calculation with you so you can see it for sure.
Okay. I could see that. I heard that you didn't have a noise study done, and I know noise studies come when the construction work is being done, and you'll stick to city ordinances when it comes to that. Some of the things like line of sight studies, lighting studies, you might be able to base off of what's currently there as to what's going to be built on. Day and night renderings possibly of proposed projects. So you said you put some renderings together. Do you have anything in terms of line of sight studies, lighting, or day and night renderings?
We haven't done any of those.
Okay, and with proposed traffic, so you think you know about how many spots you need, how many cars are going to be in this area at any one given point in time. Has there been any traffic studies?
There has not.
And all of this stuff, all of these studies they're not going to begin until the zoning is passed?
Correct.
Okay. I did hear some talk about going underground back in, so I've somewhat been involved with this on the Planning Commission back to the Audubon project when the school was still there. At that point in time, Geisinger did say, in the site of the Audubon school, you would probably be going underground there. Do you know if you're going to be going underground at this point in time?
Ideally, we would go underground. We would go as deep, as we could, but that's all going to be directed by our civil studies. So once we get our engineers and our civil firms in to look at that and really be able to explain if that's even feasible or not. That one, I do remember seeing the study, or not the study, the idea was a medical office building on that site at that time. But I don't think they did any additional studies. There was none available at that time. I think it was just a concept, an idea.
Okay. When we were talking about the 60 feet, so the neighborhood would like the height restrictions to 45 feet. Like Mr. McAndrew, I feel this is a compromise or an ask that could be had. Do you see a parking garage being able to make up for that 60 feet in the 200 blocks, say, of Colfax?
I'm sorry, can you?
Can we stick to the 45-foot height restrictions on the 200 of Colfax while making up for the 60 feet that we would take off the top in underground parking spaces?
I think a lot of that will have to, it'll depend on what we actually find. If we have that ability, if we can go under, if you take two off the top and you can put two on, underground, that's a perfect compromise. That's a perfect way to do it. But we just don't know that yet. That would be probably the ideal scenario. That way, I think then it would lower the height of that garage. There's been a lot of work, a lot of compromise with the neighbors. As we talked about, earlier in the presentation, we talked about, trying to consolidate all of the activity, all of the high-intensity noise, the high-intensity light on the 300 block. Really looking at how do we blend in the buildings, how do we, and so as we came up with, if we take the entire 400 and we put it at that 45, the 200 is shorter, and so it had to go up, to the 8 stories. That get us that parking count we think we need. So there's been quite a bit of compromise. Ideally, we're not done compromising. We would still like to do more. So if we can go underground, if we can take a level or two and put it in there, that will be perfect.
I think a lot of the difficulty here with myself and others is understanding, trying to understand this without seeing a plan.
Yeah.
So if a plan was in place or a plan was presented, we would be able to see that a little bit different.
Yeah.
And the way I see it here is if we were to curtail the 200 block at 45 feet, and you came in with some soil studies or some ground studies to say we can go under, that would be that compromise, but you would have a plan coming to the table with that. If you weren't able to go underground, you would also have to come back to the zoning board with the plan to see about getting a variance for that, and I see that as something that could occur at that time, but again, you would be coming to the table with the plan. Mm-hmm. And that would make it easier for me. That would make it easier for me to make that decision.
Certainly, I understand that.
I think that's all, Mr. King.
Thank you, Mr. Schuster. So I just have a number of the questions I was about to ask have already been answered, but in a recent article in the Times Tribune, it noted that Geisinger experienced $842 million loss for 2022, indicating that operating costs outpaced revenue, along with portfolio reductions.
Yeah.
What impact will these huge losses have on Geisinger's ability to move forward with this proposed expansion project in Scranton?
The short answer is it won't have any impact. The long answer, which is what you deserve, is we have all faced these industry headwinds. I get a blog every day from an organization called Becker's. It is a consolidator of healthcare news, and every day you see every system across America are struggling right now financially. Labor headwinds, inflation headwinds, supply headwinds, it's been compounding. And so we're not immune to that. However, we have a two-pronged strategy, and part of which Renee had talked about is the way we innovate, the way we look at things. So we're making very strategic investments. We're not making investments everywhere all the time. We're making very strategic investments. You'll notice there was just another article, preceded that one by a few weeks, where we've actually stopped construction on a dedicated musculoskeletal hospital up in the Bloomsburg market. Part of the reason why is the world changed. We went and we relooked the demographics, we relooked at what was happening with outpatient orthopedic surgeries, and we realized the model didn't make sense, so we paused it. We're going to reevaluate what that hospital is going to look like. And so those are part of that strategic investments. We're only going to make investments where it makes sense, where we'll have the biggest impact on the community. Scranton remains the #1 priority for us to make a community investment. The need is there. The second piece of that is expense reduction. As with any business, when you're facing these financial headwinds, you have to make adjustments, you have to make expense reductions. So some of the things that we're doing is we're trying to be very strategic about our expense reductions. We're looking at things where we can utilize automation in order to help with. So we talked about staffing. At any given time across a hospital in America, you've got a significant number of nurses doing audits. Nothing else but audits. These are highly trained, highly competent clinical assets, literally doing counts in a record. We have figured out how to use AI and how to use our technology and our electronic medical record to do all of that automatically. So all of our audits are now being generated using AI. That's freed up nurses back to the bedside. Those are examples, that's an example of the expense reduction. That's happening multiple times over multiple hospitals. So our two-pronged strategy, strategic expense reduction and appropriate investment.
Thank you. And that's kind of a good segue into my next question. So you had all these plans in Bloomsburg, and you were going to build this hospital, and all of a sudden it stopped. I'm assuming you probably purchased land and you were well on your way to this project. So several residents have expressed concerns that if Geisinger gets zoning approval for garage structures, it will end there, and the remainder of the hospital expansion may never happen. Can you provide some assurances that the parking garage expansion are only part of the overall project, and it's the full intention of Geisinger to complete the actual hospital expansion that you didn't complete in Bloomsburg, but I need assurances you're going to complete it in Scranton, because the fear is we're going to be left with empty lots, no actual expansion of the hospital, and we'll end up what happened on Gibson Street between Moses Taylor and Regional Hospital.
Again, short answer, 100%. Long answer, which is what you deserve. We're not in the parking business. You know, when we look at what we're trying to accomplish, we're in the healthcare business, and our goal is to provide healthcare for the community. The parking garages are just enabling projects. That's only what they're there for. It allows us to clear that path so that we can expand the hospital. We have been around for well over 100 years providing high quality, effective, efficient healthcare, not parking. Parking garages are extremely expensive. If I could wave a magic wand, I'd have surface parking. It's so much cheaper to build. Parking garages are really expensive. It would make no financial fiscal sense to build a parking garage and not build the complementary clinical resources that's needed in order to even pay for those parking garages, let alone take care of the community.
Thank you. Can we be assured that if you end up getting the zoning approval, that every one of those cars that's parked in Naog Park down on the backside are going to be out of there?
I wish I could say I could assure you, but humans are humans. Our intent, if we did the count right, we've got enough to absorb all of the cars that are in the current garages, the cars that are in Naog, and the cars that are in the secondary Dunmore lot that we use, with a little bit with room to expand. So the intent is to free up Naog, the goal is to free up Naog, and we will do everything we can working with Mr. Gatton and the Park Authority to make sure that our employees are not sneaking back there. Based on the conversations we have with our employees, don't think that's going to be an issue. Most of our employees will be thrilled that they have the ability to park in covered parking with easy access to the hospital, where they feel, you know, they're close, they're easy, their cars, you know, outside of the weather. I don't think that's going to be an issue, but I can assure you that we will, you know, we'll do everything we can to make sure our staff's not parking there.
Thank you. One of my questions had to do with additional medical services, and I've already heard the answer to that. So it sounds like that you have met with the neighborhood association, you have made some modifications from what you were originally planning, and it sounds like this continues to be fluid and flexible in terms of making changes. So it's my understanding that in the 400 block of Colfax, that there's still 75 feet left to extend down that block. Do you know, or can your architects or engineers let us know, by extending that extra 75 feet, how much more parking would that add that would help then reduce the size of the parking in the 200 block?
Yeah, we can get that. We can do a rough calculation. Our intent was to leave that kind of a green zone on that side. But yeah, we can get an estimate on how many additional spaces that could give us.
Can you get one within a week?
We can try.
Okay.
It might be a rough order of magnitude, and just put a
Right.
qualifier
No,
on
I
it.
understand.
Yeah.
I understand that. Okay. And my other question that I had to do with start to finish. And, you know, I'm well aware of land development, being in construction myself. I know that 12 to 18 months is probably even a little aggressive. Okay, so I want to take this opportunity to thank you for coming here this evening, presenting to council and the citizens that are here this evening. You're welcome to hang around. We're going to start the public hearing in about 2 or 3 minutes. I'm going to see if our council needs to use the bathroom, grab a water, and then we'll begin the public hearing. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Scranton City Council Chambers. Tonight we're going to be holding a public hearing concerning file of council number 54 of 2023, establishing regulations and restrictions for the location and use of lots, lands, buildings, and other structures, the height, number of stories, and size and bulk of buildings and structures, the density of population, off-street parking, similar accessory regulations in the city of Scranton, Lackawanna County, Pennsylvania, and for said purposes dividing the city of Scranton into districts and establishing the boundaries thereof, prescribing certain uniform regulations for each such district, and providing for administrative enforcement and amendment of its provisions in accordance with the Pennsylvania Municipalities Planning Code, MPC 53 PS 10101, as amended. I would like to invite the public up to speak this evening. We do have a sign-in sheet. We're going to follow that sign-in sheet. I would ask all the speakers that wish to address council, please state your name and address for the record. Any person who wishes to address council may do so this evening after I've exhausted the actual sign-in list. And I would ask that we're going to abide by the 5-minute council rule this evening, because we have obviously a lot of people that are interested in speaking this evening on the zoning issue. It's important to note zoning issue will not be voted on this evening. Obviously, we had the opportunity to hear from Geisinger this evening. Now is that time for a public hearing to hear from the public. So I'm going to start with the initial sign-in sheet. And once again, I would ask, if you need to have conversations with someone, I would ask that you do that in the hall so that each individual that is about to speak can be heard. We want to hear everything that everyone has to say. So please, I would ask you to respect each individual that comes up to the podium. Our first speaker is Bridget Kozarowski, Pennsylvania State Representative.
Thank you, and thank you to the council members. My name is Bridget Kozarowski, and I represent the city of Scranton. And I come here tonight with the full knowledge and the awareness of sensitivity to the folks that live in and around the hospital, whether they be a homeowner, you visit your family there, or that's where you grew up. And with that being said, as a registered nurse, I've been a nurse for 29 years, I worry about accessibility to the quality health care here in Lackawanna County, in our city. I remember touring the CMC hospital in 1989 when the trauma center was open for the first time. I got to go as a little girl, and I went with my father, who's a retired orthopedic surgeon here in Scranton, and he served the city for 45 years. And it was an unbelievable, cool experience to see this new trauma center and this emergency room. That being said, I had the opportunity to tour Geisinger CMC emergency room a couple weeks ago. And being in there, watching and seeing what I saw, it saddened me. It saddened me because the infrastructure of that facility hasn't really changed since 1989. However, the acuity of patients that we see now, the volume of patients, has changed dramatically. And it is a disservice to our community that we are not able to, we deserve quality health care here. We deserve quality care that is accessible, and we should be able to recruit and retain specialists, especially in emergency rooms. And as I heard earlier this evening, you know, we can't treat our patients if they're not in the bed. And I know we have a workforce shortage. Do not get me wrong, I hear about this all the time. It is nationwide, especially in healthcare. But for our ability to recruit and retain professionals, healthcare professionals here in our city, we need to expand and invest in this hospital. I know nobody in this room is against healthcare. I'm quite aware of that. I'm sure no one in this room wants a family member to have to wait in a hallway, wants a family member in an emergency room not to have accessibility to a specialist, especially pediatrics, neurosurgery, orthopedics, trauma. You know, we don't want to have to send our patients down the turnpike to Lehigh Valley or to Philadelphia. in a crisis, and they go by themselves, keep in mind. The family can't go. The family has to go in a car on their own and find them in wherever the hospital in a foreign setting. You know, we want to take care of our community here. A lot of our healthcare professionals have grown up in this community, and that's who they want to take care of. I worry about the expansion and the ability for us to do that here in the city without being supportive of the ways that this Geisinger CMC needs to do this. Touring that emergency room saddened me because I did not want anybody I love, anybody you in this room love, to be able to have to sit in an emergency room setting like that. And I know we talk about the parking garage. I know we talk about, you know, what kind of specialties are we going to be bringing in? Is it pediatrics? Is it emergency room? And it's fluid. Healthcare is fluid. Change is fluid. This is what we have in healthcare. But the acuity of patient care is essential to making our community safe. And that's what it's all about. The bottom line is making our families and the community members that live here, making them be safe and feel like they can have healthcare and hospital accessibilities is important to everybody, whether you're a pediatric or you're an aging population. And it is, you know, no secret that we have Pennsylvania has a very aging senior population, especially here in Lackawanna County. And we have to be ready to be able to take care. I mean, I'm aging. I would like them to be able to take care of me someday when I need to, you know, access health care. So I'm here tonight to really ask you to consider. I know this is a really hard decision. I have listened to people. I have listened to people that live in the area of the hospital, and I put myself in their shoes. And I understand why this is such a hard decision, because it is going to change the makeup of their neighborhood. And I understand that. But living near a hospital, sometimes that risk is that, but the risk of losing accessibility to good quality health care, I believe, is much larger. So thank you for hearing this tonight, and I hope that you can consider that need of our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Kozarowski. Mary Beth Mikulewicz.
Good evening. My name is Mary Beth Mikulewicz, and I live in Scranton all my life, the Hill section, for the last 40 years. What I just handed City Council is some pictures of an accident that happened on Friday in the 200 block of Colfax Avenue, which will be the block that is supposed to be bringing in the 100-foot garage. After looking at those pictures and speaking with the neighbors, people speed in the morning to get to work on time, and we're not sure if that's the case in those pictures, but I feel parking garages, whether they're 45 feet or 100 feet, do not belong in a residential section. I feel that maybe they should be off campus, shuttle your people in, and build lower clinics there. I know one of the biggest things is the ER. Put a smaller ER across the street for your non-critical patients, your non-trauma patients, people that may need stitches or have a broken, ankle or something like that, something that's not going to be like an accident or like a stabbing or something like that, which could possibly free up your beds on the other side. Have a smaller clinic across the street, do your ER there. With building 2 garages, it's probably going to take maybe 3 to 5 years before better health care comes into the area. I don't understand why Geisinger will not build, they have so much space there, build newer buildings there now and get to your health care sooner than the garages. I just think garages are not needed in a residential section. And as for the current parking that they have now, I walk every morning, and rainy days I took a walk in the one Geisinger garage, went all the way up to the top, came all the way down to the bottom. There was 124 open spots at 9:15 in the morning, which means your whole day shift would have been there. So they're claiming that there's a 2-year waiting period. I don't think all those people were on vacation. So it seems like there are open spots, and I'm thinking maybe the employees just don't want to pay. So they pay $10 a month out of a check, which comes out to $260 a year. So these people that don't want to pay, will they end up in Naog Park? But I really feel Geisinger probably has talented engineers and designers that they could rework these plans. And as for the garage down on the 200 block of Arthur, 100 feet is just crazy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Joanne Williams.
Good evening, Joanne Williams. I live in the 200 block of Arthur Avenue, but also we had a home on the 200 block of Colfax. Now, I just want to state, listening to them, and I had met Ron and Renee, I think it is. First of all, I have stated here before that yes, we have wonderful health care in Scranton, okay? And I also had to go to the emergency room a few times, and I saw how overcrowded it was. But now let's talk about, and I know they need to do something, but at the expense of a neighborhood. They talked about the open communication between them and the neighbors. I remember one meeting. That's it. A hotline, that's news to me tonight, and a lot of other people sitting out here. So, you know, as far as doing that, like, they're not being a good neighbor communicating with us to let us know what their plans are. And also, over the weekend, I don't know what they were doing in the lots, you know, the lot in 200 block of Colfax Avenue that once was beautiful homes. The noise from Saturday morning to Saturday evening was outrageous. Sunday morning. So can you imagine when they start building, or whenever they start building, let's think about the people on Roslyn Avenue. Let's think about the people on the 200 block of Wheeler and Linden Street. Between the noise and the air pollution, it's not good. That was our neighborhood. Yeah, I remember the Hanneman Hospital. I was born in it. And I remember when CMC started building. But you know what? They should have taken this hospital and taken it up to a mountain and built it. Now, you know what I mean? But I'm going to tell you, they're not being honest and truthful. They have no plans to put before you, yet they want you to give them the zoning. You need to think. And the other people in other neighborhoods need to think too. That you don't think this can happen to your neighborhood? You have to set the example now. You need to. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Richard Foley.
Richard Foley, 314 Pear Street. President King, Vice President McAndrew, City Council members, good evening. I'm Rich Foley. I'm a senior council representative with the Eastern Atlantic States Regional Council of Carpenters. It is my privilege to represent the men and women of Carpenters Local 445 in Scranton. I come before you tonight to speak in favor of the 2 parking garages Geisinger CMC wishes to build in the city. I am confident that these projects will be built by the safest and best educated carpenters. Our carpenters earn family-sustaining wages while providing health insurance for their families, as well as a retirement for their future. Just as important, projects like this are necessary for us to be able to employ and train additional apprentices. Apprentices who will be trained without the burden of tuition or a future that they're trying to pay down debt incurred through their education. Projects like this provide opportunity for city and local residents. The city has been fortunate to have a first-class medical facility and a partner in the community. Geisinger CMC has invested many, many millions of dollars into this facility and continues to employ countless local residents. Without these parking garages, Geisinger may be forced to move future expansion of services or facilities to other communities. This would lead to less local employment and longer travel distances for care. I acknowledge every large-scale construction project changes the landscape. However, I believe this one comes with many benefits. It will allow for improved parking for the hospital while providing relief to the local streets and possibly Naab Park. It will allow Geisinger to continue to grow and improve within the city. Most importantly, it will allow employment to grow. First under the construction, then for the life of the facility. We need to provide opportunities for our youth to stay and raise their families here. I am asking City Council to support this project, and I would like to thank everyone for their time.
Thank you, Mr. Foley. Conrad Bosley.
Mr. King, Conrad Bosley is an expert witness for the neighbors. I'm going to ask him some questions during the 5 minutes allotted for his presentation.
So is Edmund Skakiti speaking, or is Conrad Bosley?
Conrad Bosley is speaking. This is his testimony. I'm just going to ask the questions.
Okay.
All right?
Sure.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Bosley, would you identify yourself for the members of City Council?
My name is Conrad Bosley. I'm a resident of the city of Scranton. I'm a certified residential appraiser under the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania.
And have you concentrated your appraisal business primarily on residential properties?
Yes.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yes. My license is in certified residential appraisal work.
And are you familiar with the neighborhood in the vicinity of Geisinger Community Medical Center?
Yes, I am.
And at the request of the Geisinger CMC neighbors, did you have an opportunity to look at that area and look at the area proposed development as explained by the Geisinger representatives this evening?
Yes, I did.
And do you have an opinion whether the proposed parking garages as portrayed or discussed this evening on the 400 block of Colfax and the 200 block of Colfax will have any effect on the fair market value of the neighboring real estate?
It's my professional opinion that the change of the area to permit parking garages would have a negative effect on the property owners in the 200 block and the 400 block of Arthur Avenue, as well as some of the properties that go along Vine Street and Linden Street, the corner of Colfax and Vine and Colfax and Linden.
And to what extent, if at all, would additional vehicular traffic have on property values?
The additional traffic value, the additional traffic would cause more traffic and more congestion around the area. Parking problems would probably increase, and there would be more difficulty for the people who live on those 2 blocks to enjoy their life that they're used to now.
Now, with regard to any construction period for garages or whatever it may be, how difficult would it be, if at all, for a homeowner to try to sell their home in the midst of some substantial construction activity?
With the unknown situation that would come about because of construction going on there and the disruption of the neighborhood, and also with the unknown of what would appear there that was not visual to them at the time that they're going to make that decision, it would also have a negative effect on any buyer looking to buy one of the properties that was offered for sale there.
And have the opinions that you expressed this evening to City Council were based upon your extensive experience or background in residential real estate appraisals?
Yes, they are.
Thank you. And if anyone from council has a question for Mr. Bosley?
No, we appreciate your input, and we'll take it under consideration as we consider this matter.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Jamie Wilcox.
Good evening. My name is Jamie, and I have been a registered nurse in the emergency department at Geisinger for more than 8 years. Despite being on the administrative side of things these days, I still pick up overtime and work side by side with our staff regularly. I am your bedside nurse. Healthcare today looks much different than it did when I graduated nursing school. We've had a global pandemic, many nurses have left the bedside, and patient acuity and volumes are increasing, creating a much more stressful environment in our department. Pair that with the stress of having to try to care for patients when you don't have the space and equipment to do so, and you've ultimately taken on a career that is mentally, physically, and emotionally exhausting. I want to take a moment to paint a picture for you. A gentleman arrives to the emergency department with his mother, who has been battling constipation for 1 week. Despite being uncomfortable, mom's vital signs are within normal limits. She is awake and oriented and seems to be a fairly stable patient. After triage, she's placed into the waiting room because the 38 rooms and 15 hallway beds of the ER are filled with a mix of ED patients and admitted patients waiting for rooms upstairs, a common occurrence at GCMC. Finally, about 5 hours later, a hallway bed becomes available for mom, and she's moved there to a stretcher where she awaits a provider. Her labs and abdominal x-ray in the waiting room are seemingly stable, vitals reassessed and stable, and a CAT scan was ordered after she was seen by a provider once in her hallway bed. While awaiting transport's arrival, all of a sudden mom reports that she isn't feeling well and within seconds goes into cardiac arrest. Now remember, the ED is at maximum capacity. Mom had to wait 5 hours just to get into that hallway bed, and now her life is threatened. Staff flocked to the area to establish an artificial airway and administer CPR. Mom is intubated in the hallway. Staff do their best to shield all of this from patients in surrounding hallway beds. Mom needs oxygen and suction, and staff have to rely on portable canisters since she's not in a traditional room. CPR remains in progress, and once an airway is established, mom is finally able to be rushed into the trauma bay to continue resuscitative efforts. Now, I want everyone to think about this being your own mother, father, or even themselves. People often forget about what is or could be happening in the emergency department until it's their time of need. One day you're driving to work listening to your favorite song on the radio, and the next you're being woken up out of a medically induced coma and weaned off a ventilator. Your life saved because of the care you received after being struck by a reckless driver. The story I shared about mom isn't fictitious. It happened in our department a few months back, and it could happen again today or tomorrow. Our department is constantly stretched to its absolute limits, maximum patient volumes, maximum capacity, and we absolutely cannot provide the excellent care that we do in the space we have. It simply can't happen, and I am telling you that as someone who has seen a huge growth in both volume and the severity of illness in the patients we see. We are bursting at the seams. I walked into work yesterday to a department that was drowning in every sense of the word. 80 patients deep at 7 a.m. with 27 in the waiting room, others packed into every hallway bed, corner, and chair you could find, 38 admitted patients waiting to go upstairs to a room. We were able to get some extra help there, but there was no place to put anyone else. Even with all the hands in the world, it is impossible to provide care when there's nowhere to put people. Our waiting room patients and their families are agitated as they wait to be seen, and I understand their frustrations and I empathize with them, but we are simply doing our best with the resources we have. Placing patients in hallway beds compromises both patient privacy to them and other patients in surrounding rooms. Patients in hallway beds can easily overhear conversations at the nurse's station involving other patients, have to talk about their own medical information to a provider in front of other patients and staff, and have an all-around lack of privacy and resources that patients placed into rooms have. I stepped away from my full-time position at GCMC in the summer of 2021 to pursue a career as an ED travel nurse, and I swore the only reason I would ever stop traveling was if an administrative role in the ED at GCMC ever opened up. And in October of 2022, I came back to Geisinger full-time as an administrative coordinator. The only reason I was willing to do so was because this team is my family, and I believe so wholeheartedly in the care our ED physicians, nurses, and staff provide. It is second to none. I want them to feel appreciated for their hard work, but our space constraints challenge our ability to provide care we are proud of when it comes to access to critical equipment and the dignity our patients deserve. I've also seen what a facility with adequate space to treat patients can do for both the patient and staff experience, and let me tell you, the difference is unreal. The EMS crews who line our hallways waiting for a bed for their patient can't serve our community if they are inside the walls of our room, waiting for a room. I'm here this evening to advocate for our ER, the much-needed care this community deserves. We absolutely cannot continue to provide the care with the space we have to work with. We just lost an ED in this city, and I have a feeling it's only going to get worse. If we want Geisinger CMC to continue to be our local hospital for certified stroke, heart attack, and trauma care, we must be allowed to grow. As a nurse who knows what lies ahead if we don't, I ask that you please consider your family, friends, and neighbors. I dread the day that anyone in this community comes through our ambulance bay doors and we simply don't have a care area to treat you in. Lives are truly at stake. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Jamie. Tim Schwartz.
So I'm Tim Schwartz. I live 823 Myrtle Street, and I'm the president of the Hill Neighborhood Association. I'm here tonight to support the neighbors around Geisinger over the last year. I think it was about a year ago now where I had the first meeting with the leaders of the Neighborhood Association with the zoning about the zoning map. And what I remember is that the Green Ridge Association said, you know, we really have a problem with this. And then it was said, well, okay, we can change that for you. And then South Scranton Neighborhood Association said, well, you know, we really have a problem with this. And it was said, okay, we can change that as well. And I said, well, we have a real problem with this as well. We're concerned about the neighbors and the neighborhood around the hospital. And nothing got changed. Nothing was even considered. It's been a weird process through and through. In the last year, every Monday night, I've sat with the residents around the hospital, heard their anger, heard their pain, heard their anxiety, heard their stress, heard how they've carried for a year the zoning map and the changes that are being made to their neighborhood. Changes being made to houses that they've lived in for 60 years. 80 years that they've lived in with their parents, that they've seen the city change a bit, but they've raised their kids in these houses, and it breaks my heart to listen to this, the anxiety and fear and their brokenheartedness over the last year. It's been a weird process through and through, and so I'm here to advocate for those neighbors. What I've heard tonight is people say, you know, you need to imagine what it would be like to have somebody come into your room and tell you about the cancer diagnosis you have with somebody else in that room. You need to imagine what it is for this person. You need to imagine how we can only have one pediatric ER room. I'd invite you to imagine as well the pain and anxiety and stress and heartache that the neighbors around the hospital have gone through over the last year and will continue to go through over the next 10 years if the zoning doesn't change. But I wouldn't say imagine it. You know, there's a gallery full of people who can tell you about that this has been terrible for their lives. I think everybody here would say we need more ER space in this city. We need better medical services in this city. We don't want to have to drive to Philadelphia or New York or Allentown or wherever when we get sick. Everybody would say that. But I'm saying not at the cost of the quality of life for a whole neighborhood. It's not just Colfax or Arthur, it's that whole neighborhood that the quality of life is going to be affected. It was said tonight, let me see if I can find it because I typed it down. The last thing we want to do is impact the quality of life of people while we are impacting the quality of life of people. Those neighbors are set for 10 years of construction, I don't even know how long, of construction noises, of lighting, of backup sounds, of all of that. We're affecting the quality of life, and that can't change. But these residents, people's lives, families are too important to put through that, to sacrifice them on behalf of more medical services. I think many times when there is a plan put out, there's always a better opportunity. There's always a better idea. Whether it's digging down underneath and having a 2-level ER or down underneath for more parking or whatever it may be, there's got to be a better solution than sacrificing the quality of living of 10 different blocks around the hospital. And so I would encourage you, as you try to make this decision, to think if there please be a better idea, a better plan. You know, I live a block from that barren block between Moses Taylor and Regional. There's nothing there. And what I suspect is that 10 or 15 years ago, before I moved here, somebody had a really good idea that these hospitals need to expand or connect. I remember driving from the highway back to my house, and there was this big poster on that barren block of what it would look like, you know, kind of just building blocks or something like that. It's still barren. There's still nothing there. It's a great idea to bring healthcare into the city, more dedicated healthcare into the city. But I can't save at the expense of my neighbors. I can't say it at the expense of people who've lived there for such a long time. So I know you have a great choice ahead of you, and please hear my support and the Hill Neighborhood Association's support for these neighbors and their livelihoods and their quality of life. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Schwartz. Barry Bennigan.
Good evening, Council. My name is Barry Bennington. I'm a resident of 1612 Linden Street here in Scranton. I'm going to keep this short and sweet because I got to go. I'm asking you to rethink and reconsider the zoning issue on the 200 block of Colfax Avenue, to keep it, I believe it's called civic institutional, or institutional instead of civic. We need to limit the height of the structure from 100 to 45. The flow of traffic as of right now up Linden Street is incredible and has increased, I would say 100% since Geisinger bought CMC. And there's also bus stops in that area as well, elementary bus stops. I think you really need to consider the zoning issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bennington. Maurice Schumacher.
Marie Schumacher, 1799 East Mountain Road in Scranton. I know that Geisinger owns a lot of real estate, and I cannot understand why, if they need something that's dedicated to, say, pediatrics, they couldn't build on some of that land that they have, or even empty out some of what they have. But that is not the real reason that I'm here. I'm here because I'm concerned about Naog Park. I have loved Naog Park since I've been young and went up there every night when I was still working here. Somehow, just looking across the street, I mean, Arthur Avenue was the place. I can remember, I think it was the Fruhan's house. They even had an elevator. And, you know, nobody else had an elevator. And that was the place to live then. But looking across the street from Naog Park to a lot of cement is going to break the beauty of being there. And I really think it's a big mistake to do what I know that you want to do very much, and you want to please, I'm sure, our mayor. But think about the people. Think about all these people out here who are going to lose their homes, what they're going through right now. They count. And I think you should think about them first. And I'm sure that Geisinger has a lot of brains, and they can figure something else out that will let them do everything they want as far as expanding what they do, which is health care, not real estate. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schumacher. David Rinaldi.
Good evening, Council. Thanks for having this public hearing. I'm Dave Rinaldi, 212 Colfax. I'm the property owner there, along with myself and 3 neighbors. We're the only houses on the 200 block of Colfax. But I wanted to make a few comments about the presentation that we heard from Geisinger tonight. First thing I want to emphasize to Council is, you know, they talked about streets around the parking garages, but they only mentioned Roslyn. Did they mention the properties on Colfax? Did they mention the properties that are going to be dwarfed by the garage on Wheeler? No. And then when they said, without expert testimony, that the value of the properties would go up, they took into consideration the entire Hill Neighborhood Association. I mean, the whole entire Hill neighborhood, not just the people who are directly affected. So I sort of got the feeling that I was in the land of Oz tonight listening to them, because there's a lot of things that they said. One, they talked about the development process. I know you might remember that slide, but the first thing was zoning first. If they weren't a mega million-dollar corporation, they wouldn't be looking for zoning first. Anybody who served on a zoning hearing board or a planning commission knows that there are ways, and even if council amends it to the 45 feet, they could still get a variance if that's a big enough hardship. So they have many ways to proceed, but that was just one of them. The other, I don't believe, anyway, that they're even acting good faith 1 minute. They talked about having 2 meetings. So I want to talk about the first one because I was there. Matter of fact, I invited by email Dr. Rothschild. That's the one where the first thing out of their mouth was, we've already taken over Naog Park. Now, every time you ask about a study, oh, we can't do that first, so we got a chicken and an egg here. They want you to put the egg first. They want you to change the zoning. There's really, there's no reason. There are avenues they can use under the current ordinance, or if council decides to reduce that height for the 200 block of Colfax, they can go to the zoning hearing board. So there's many ways to do this. They wouldn't commit to anything, not a thing tonight. You ask them their plans? No, we don't have plans. You have to do something first. Then if you do it, hey, maybe we'll do it. But then again, we don't know what we're going to run into, so maybe we won't. Just like that example that came up at the end of the session. So the thing that I want to emphasize is that we're really talking about a community, that neighborhood. We're talking about specific individuals, the people on Colfax, the people on Wheeler, the people on Roslyn, in regard to the 100-foot structure. They didn't address any of those specifically. Any of those specifically. So what I'd like to finish with is, they talked about the emergency care, and they talked about, and they told you there's going to be a 10% expansion in the beds. 10%. We're not talking about 50, 60, 70 beds, 10%. I mean, seriously? They have to destroy a neighborhood to increase that by 10%, which they said is their biggest thing? And let me address the idea of privacy. Well, what do you think insurance pays more for? A private room or semi-private? So there were examples in everything they said that this is profit-driven. Profit-driven. And they don't care about the neighborhood. The idea that they're going to set up a committee sometime after you agree to everything that they want, and if they do the expansion, I mean, how can anybody come to an idea with that, an agreement? But thank you very much. I appreciate the time.
Thank you, Mr. Rinaldi. Andrea Mulrine.
Good evening, council members. My name is Andrea Mulrine. I live on Woodlawn Street in Scranton. Thank you for the opportunity to address you this evening. I am a Scrantonian. I am a proud University of Scranton alumna, and I am also a proud Geisinger Commonwealth School of Medicine employee. Many of you know me as a community leader, but tonight I am speaking simply as a member of my community, not representing any of the organizations that I do volunteer work with. CMC has always been and is now an important asset for the greater Scranton community. From its birth as Hahnemann Hospital in 1897 to the merger with Westside Hospital in 1962, which created Community Medical Center, this hospital has served our community. Since Geisinger acquired CMC in 2012, they've consistently invested in the hospital, offering more high-quality healthcare programs and services in Scranton, which allows those needing care to stay close to home. Geisinger's investment in our community is front and center with the medical school. The Commonwealth Medical College, TCMC originally, or as we love to call it, this community's medical college, was established by a group of visionary community leaders to fill a critical need. We need more doctors serving the community. The college's integration with Geisinger has provided both stability for the college and new opportunities for our students. Scholarships for local students have been provided by generous foundations and donors, and in addition, as you did hear earlier, Geisinger created the Abigail Geisinger Scholars Program for students who want to stay in the region to practice in a primary care field. They can graduate with no medical school debt. Geisinger continues to add new residency programs, giving additional opportunities for students to remain in the region as they continue their training. I can't speak about the college without discussing revitalization, especially of downtown Scranton. Having this influx of faculty, staff, and students has propelled investment in our city, with multiple developers investing in our historic buildings. Downtown apartments are at a premium, and we continue to see the birth of new businesses. Many of you know I've spoken to candidates for public office for a long time, and we've talked about brain drain. We all know Scranton's history, first as a thriving industrial center for iron and anthracite coal. Next came the garment industry with low-paying jobs and piecework. Members of my husband's family worked in that industry. We had an attempt at making Scranton a hub of call centers sometime in the 90s, also not the best paying jobs. When we talk about economic development now and stopping brain drain, we should be focused on embracing two of our strong suits, eds and meds, education and healthcare. These are industries that bring living wage, long-term job opportunities, careers that attract talented people to our area and keep our next generation in the region. The continued growth of GCMC is important to Scranton. Traditionally, people leave for New York and Philadelphia for elite healthcare. If we can offer those services here, no one has to leave home for outstanding care. Our aging population, including me, needs care close to home. I had knee replacement surgery in 2019 at CMC and received excellent care. No one has to go to Allentown, Philly, or New York for exceptional orthopedics. Then there's another story. Last year this time, I went into the ED. I was one of those people in that hallway bed. I spent 5 days in CMC last year in a semi-private room, and I dare anyone to say that that's a good way to recover and to get well. You can't get well in a space you share with someone who has their own list of medical problems, and a private room would have made my stay much less stressful. I also had an aunt who has since passed away that I was a caretaker for with dementia. She was in the hospital 3 times, in the emergency room, in those hallway beds. Not a good solution. In order to support excellent health care right here in Scranton, economic development within our city, and career and life-changing opportunities for our people, I urge City Council to see the value of approving the citywide rezoning plan for the future of our community. Thank you for your time this evening and for your deliberations on this important issue.
Thank you, Andrew. Phyllis Reinhardt.
Members of the Scranton City Council, I was going to greet the Geisinger officers, and residents of Scranton. I'm Phyllis Reinhardt. I married a Scrantonian. We raised our children here in the Hills section, and I graduated from the University of Scranton. Shortly after that, I took a federal job in 1979. I tell you this because I left as the university had begun their expansion in the Hills section. When I returned in 2000, I found streets were not merely one way, they were private conveyances. Linden Street around the school was now part of the university campus. Homes that had generated top property tax dollars were now tax-exempt dorms. The houses that remained in the blocks around the university looked unkept, and I'm sure the city no longer collected top property tax dollars on those now absentee landowners' student off-campus housing. It was stated at a recent council meeting that 51% of properties in Scranton are now tax exempt. My first question to the members of the Scranton City Council is this: can the city afford to lose more critical property tax dollars from upscale homes in the Hill section? Tax dollars have already been lost through Geisinger's purchase of homes on Colfax. How many homes will we lose to the tax rolls? How many will be purchased for low-income rentals because nobody else will want to buy these beautiful homes after Geisinger's expansion becomes reality? I mentioned the university expansions and Geisinger's proposed, because any time that these expansions take place in the city, it costs the residents. Not only, obviously, to the taxpayers, because when properties are lost, generally taxes for the rest of us are going to go up. We mentioned that there will be a traffic problem, so I won't mention that. But obviously, aside from the monetary cost, there is also those intrinsic values, such as, will you have the funds to do both recreational repair, say, of the playground at Naog, and also take care of the water runoff that is going to occur from these parking garages. Parents, I don't know if they are aware, but 53% of our school funding comes from local taxes. Lost tax properties will reduce school funding in Scranton. Will tax dollars for recreational, I've already spoke to that. So I am certain that, well, listening to the presentation, I wonder if the council really can make an informed vote on this zoning next week. So
Thank you, Mrs. Reinhardt. I'm sorry,
Thank you.
5 minutes is up. Thank you. Jess Nolan.
Jessica Nolan, Vine Street in Scranton. I wanted to start actually with some questions. First, pointing out the many questions not answered or deflected by the hospital. So for example, Mr. Smurl asked how many beds will be added to the ER. The answer was basically, we'll see. There was a question about whether or not it was fully staffed that veered into very strange directions about junior high school students being trained to enter the medical profession. I'm going to take that as a no, that it's not fully staffed. Dr. Rothschild asked about why NAOC parking can't be used. This question was never answered. Instead, we were told that if we go lower in height, we'll have fewer spaces than we do now. And then to further confuse us, Mr. Beer said that parking garages are really expensive, and if he could wave a magic wand and do surface parking, he would, when that's exactly what NAOC currently provides, surface parking. They were asked, can we be promised that if these garages are built, there will be no more parking in NAOC? The answer was sort of a, we'll do our best. Mr. Schuster asked what I thought was an excellent question related to parking and beds and some of the previous questions. How can the number of parking spots be determined if we don't know the number of beds? Again, I'm very confused as to how the number of parking spots can be so inflexible while simultaneously telling us that everything else about the expansion is indeterminate. So lots of stuff we don't know, but we know we have to have all these parking spots. Dr. Rothschild asked another great question about community benefits agreement. That's something I would like to know know more about. And the response was basically, no, it's too early in the process. We can't provide that. Now I have some questions for council to think about. I don't necessarily want you to respond right now. So we saw a picture of the area around NAOG and the proposed expansion, and as far as I could tell from that map, the only thing planned for the east side of the 200 block of Colfax was a pocket park in the areas they've acquired. Why are they seeking an institutional zone if all they want to do is put in a park? That could be put in under city mixed-use residential zoning. There was a question about what the facade of the building will look like. So again, a question for you to consider, is GCMC legally bound to build the structures as they've been described here today? There was a question about how community will be involved in the process. The nurse manager gave us a very nice answer about how they want to engage in a robust process of dialogue. They implied that they would sort of present us with options and we would sort of get to take our pick. Are they legally obligated to dialogue with neighbors as they've promised to do? Are they legally obligated to provide attractive landscaping? Are these things that we can leave here today knowing that if you vote in favor of their zoning next week that we're going to get all these great things? I know the answer to that question, and so do you. In fact, if you listen to Mr. Beer tonight, he actually told us the reality of how the design work for the expansion will proceed. GCMC is very aware of the costs associated with this work. It's about the money. He told us engineering fees are 2 to 3%. We were told it doesn't make sense to invest in detailed drawings this early in the process. He told us that inflation will determine if they have discretionary funds to do some of the landscaping and design work. So basically, if the economic conditions aren't right, we get an ugly, cheap building. There's no guarantee. We're here today to ask City Council to amend the current draft of the SAPA zoning plans that the west side of the 200 block of Colfax is zoned institutional rather than civic. I would point out that the institutional zoning would still allow the hospital to expand its footprint. This is not a neighborhood win scenario. There is still an expansion that's going to happen and large structures that are going to be built. It's not a request to prevent expansion, but rather to mitigate the impact of commercial construction on the quality of life on what is still today a residentially zoned neighborhood, as of today. And so For almost a year now, we've been working with an organized group of neighbors to preserve the livability of our neighborhood in the face of these proposed zoning changes. Both the process that led to the zoning changes as well as the specifics of the proposed expansion matter. Others have spoken about the specifics of the proposal, so I would like to say a little bit in the less than minute I have about the process. So we learned last spring that the city, at the request of GCMC, planned to rezone parts of Colfax Avenue to allow for the hospital to expand the current footprint. I want to thank the current president of the Greenridge Neighborhood Association because that's basically how we found out. Prior to that meeting, neither the city nor the hospital had reached out to the neighbors or the HNA to solicit feedback about the proposed changes. So once again, today I think also illustrated symbolically this point, GCMC has this privileged position at the table of power, and the neighbors are left knocking at the front door begging to be let in. Why wasn't there a more thoughtful city planning process that engaged the community? And I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Jess. Julie Byerly.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm Julie Byerly, and I live at 749 North Webster in the Hills section. I'm also serving as the Dean of Geisinger Commonwealth School of Medicine. I've lived in Scranton just 15 months now. I live in the Hills section, and my husband and I walk our dog almost every day around Naog Park and around GCMC. I came here to Scranton because of the opportunity that the partnership between Geisinger Health System and Geisinger Commonwealth School of Medicine provides to create and fulfill the vision of the founders of our medical school to create doctors to serve our region. Geisinger invested a tremendous amount in our medical school, including the millions of dollars per year of Abigail Geisinger scholarship support for students who do commit to working in our region. I love that opportunity, and I care about the future of our community. I'm a pediatrician, and as a pediatrician, I understand the value of health care. As a dean of our school, I am working with you hard to ensure that Scranton has a thriving future. I want to be able to recruit the best and the brightest here to our school and to become the doctors for our region. The proposed expansion of GCMC impacts all of this. It impacts the neighborhood I call home and the success of the school I work in every day, and it affects the success of recruiting and retaining the doctors that we need. It's a complex question, and it's important that the benefits of the decision that you make outweigh the risks. And I can understand the position of those who don't want large-scale construction close to home. Naog Park really is lovely, and I believe it can and will be even with this project. As has been stated many times, the current facility is not what we need for the people of Scranton with regard to their clinical care, but it is also not what we need to recruit and retain a health profession workforce that we want to serve here. We have to make it better. We have to address how crowded it is, not only for our patients, but also for our learners. Our learners set foot in our facility here in Scranton, and they don't want to be here. They want to go to a place that cares and creates a clinical environment where they can thrive and where they can see themselves working successfully in the long term, where healthcare they perceive is valued and invested in by the community. I worry about what it would mean if we don't fix this problem. I worry how we'll take our medical school students who learn in this beautiful building in Scranton and then have to send them into clinical environments in other places. There is value beyond just the clinical care that I'd like to see. I've seen firsthand how teaching hospitals can impact the well-being of communities. By aligning with our medical school, which we're so fortunate to have here in Scranton, teaching hospitals add value to communities while they train doctors and nurses. The quality of the care is increased in a teaching environment. Research can be done. Patients can have access to clinical trials that provide opportunities for them. Residency and fellowship training programs can grow when there is space for them to grow. This vibrant teaching and learning environment in a beautiful clinical setting makes for great neighbors who come here as young people aspiring to be doctors, train in these settings, grow roots while they are living here, and become the physicians that our founders envisioned when they created our medical school. I see the improvement of GCMC as providing the programmatic growth we need in our area for the clinical care of our community members, and crucial to helping us attract and retain the healthcare professional workforce that we need to provide that care in the future. Supporting this project is support of our medical school, and I'm grateful for that. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Julie. The next speaker, I can't really read the second name. It's Brian, is it Carnes or Kramer? Or?
Frank.
Brian Frank?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. 315 Cottage Avenue.
My name is Brian Frank. I'm a double board certified trauma and critical care and acute care surgeon at CMC, and I want to thank the council for allowing me to speak on Geisinger's behalf. I've lived in Lackawanna County and treated this community for almost 7 years, and prior to my work at CMC, I trained at Christiana Care, an 1,100 bed, mostly private bed, level 1 trauma center in Delaware, and subsequently at the University of Pennsylvania, where I did my trauma and critical care fellowship. I moved up here to be with my in-laws who have lived in this community for 3 generations. I take deep pride in the care we provide our patients, nearly 3,000 trauma patients alone in the last year, and recognize we can do more, but are limited by space and resources. When I arrived in 2016, we treated approximately 1,500 trauma patients, and this number has doubled in a short time with the closure of other emergency departments. This is only going to increase over the next 12 months. Moreover, the population in Northeast Pennsylvania is growing, cultural and educational opportunities are expanding, but we as a hospital have not been able to grow to keep up with this pace. The time is now to make these overdue changes. The constraints are impacting our experiences as patients, and further delay will only compound this. On a typical day, we're notified at about 6:30 in the morning regarding capacity status. What was once an unusual occurrence is now part of the daily routine. The hospital is routinely over 100% capacity, but this is not just a number. And for every percentage point, one of our neighbors, friends, or loved ones is experiencing one of the worst days of their lives, but doing so in an unnecessarily public way. Their stories are what I want to share with you now. On March 20th, there was a horrible triple shooting in West Side. The events of that day have been well reported by the lay press. I'm not going to recount their experiences. But at CMC, what has been told you is we have 2 resuscitation or trauma bays. And that's where we provide multiple emergent life-saving interventions. But on March 20th, what wasn't reported in the press was that there was a patient who had passed away in Trauma Room 1. The family was in the room with that patient grieving when the alert of these GSWs came in. And what wasn't reported was needing to usher that grieving family out of the room, moving the recently deceased patient into the hallway momentarily while we struggled to find an acceptable place to allow them to grieve, just so that we continue to try to care for the patients of Scranton. What wasn't reported was the discomfort of that family who couldn't be allowed to grieve in place because our facility is too limited by its current size. Unfortunately, it's not just a one-off. As an acute care surgeon, I treat patients with unexpected surgical emergencies like perforations or blockages that need surgery. Sometimes this is because of an unexpected cancer. I just want you to imagine for a moment that you found yourself or a loved one in that position, and due to our current capacity constraints, most, if not all, of our floor beds are semi-private, meaning you will have a roommate. Then time comes where I enter the room and share your pathology with you. I'll draw the curtain to give you a sense of privacy, and I'll sit on the bed and hold your hand as we talk. But at the end of that conversation where I share the news of your cancer, this deeply intimate conversation is one you shared with a stranger in the next bed. Worse yet is these capacity constraints are further impacting your ability to receive emergency care via EMS. Per regulation, EMS needs to provide a safe handoff when they arrive to the emergency department. When we are at capacity, again, a near daily occurrence, patients and by proxy EMS are held waiting for a bed in the emergency department. When beds are filled in the ED, there's nowhere for EMS to hand that patient off. What results is a traffic jam that has greater implications than slowing your drive home. Unfortunately, what that means for you is that if you call 911 and expect to have an emergency responder attend to you, your wait is longer. EMS is not as available as they once were, resulting in delays in emergency care. And when you arrive to the ED, assuming you are triaged to a bed and not to the waiting room, this is likely to be a hall bed, not because you're any less sick or because you are in fact ill, need emergency evaluation, but the only place we have to provide this care is in the hallway. On some days, we have to resort to triaging patients to the waiting room and caring for them there. This is not normal, this is not okay, and this must change. To be clear, I'm not here on my own behalf or on Geisinger's behalf. I'm here for this community. As your care provider, I don't want you to be waiting longer for EMS, hearing bad news sitting next to a stranger, or having to rush through your grief because more patients continue to come to the emergency department. Unfortunately, the time for debate, the time for deliberation, and the time for alternatives is long past. We don't have the luxury of time, and I hope you, the council, will approve the zoning ordinance as proposed so that this community can continue to receive the care and compassion that everybody deserves. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Frank. John L. Thomas. Doesn't appear as though Mr. Thomas is here. That exhausts the sign-in list. So at this time, is there anyone else who would like to be heard?
Doris Klosky, Colfax Avenue, Scranton. I'm going to keep this extremely short because mostly anything I wanted to say was already said by Mr. Rinaldi and Ms. Jessica Nolan. So basically the only thing that I want to say is it seems like there's a great deal about training the people at Geisinger Medical School, which I think is absolutely wonderful, but they do get their free tuition 1 year for 1 year. So after 4 years, if their tuition's paid for, they can leave for another city and any other place they want to go. And most of the hospitals, the better hospitals anyway, will pay student loans off for doctors that have graduated to get them to join their services all over the country. One thing I did want to say about Geisinger, the emergency room, I spent a lot of time in there, and yes, I think they definitely need a bigger emergency room. We're not against that. We're only against the size of the garage. But I spend time in the beds, not in the hallways, luckily, and I still was there 5-6 hours because they only had like 1 or 2 doctors in the whole area. Now, I can't attest to that being today because this was probably within the last 4 years. I also wanted to say that the benefit agreement that Jessica asked for them to sign, or whatever that was for the neighbors, they won't commit to anything because they're past, if you go by past performance, everything they've told us as neighbors, they've reneged on. Everything in the past that they told us, one, if they got the school, they would never ever put parking across the street unless it was underground and it would only be a building. They were already reneging that. Anything they tell you, if they have a change in the administration, Mr. Beers leaves for more money someplace else, the next person's going to say, well, it doesn't matter what they said. That's the only credibility problem that the neighbors have. That's why they're so upset, because everything they've told us in the past, they've reneged on or just haven't carried through. The dumpsters, when I asked them to please just put a sound barrier around the dumpsters across the street from my house, they wouldn't do it. They just ignored it. Yes, they have a place you can call, and sometimes they'll do something, but they don't always. You ask them for something, they don't ignore you. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Doris. Once again, if you could please state your name and your address, appreciate it.
Thank you. I'm Laura Augustini, president of the Green Ridge Neighborhood Association, and I live on Grandview Street in Scranton. As has been said, about a year ago, the neighborhood associations got together with Don King and a couple of others with regards to this zoning ordinance. I am in favor of the zoning ordinance being passed because it is something that we have needed for over 30 years. It's the old zoning ordinance is just not working anymore. But I have to say that While adjustments were made for various neighborhood associations, you have to remember that it is the neighborhoods that build Scranton, the neighborhoods that are a foundation of Scranton. When you make a change to an R1A zone, as soon as you make it into a less restrictive zone, within 7 to 20 years, the property values decrease. With decreased property values, you have decreased tax income. We're already struggling here with taxes for the city of Scranton. We're one of the highest taxed municipalities, if not the highest taxed municipality. I live in Green Ridge, and my house is a modest home, but I do know that Green Ridge, because we're an R1A zone, we pay over 25% of the property taxes for the city of Scranton. And I know that the Hill, because they're also an R1A zone, they pay a significant portion of the property taxes of Scranton. So as the values of those R1A zones decrease, so decreases the income, the property tax income for the city of Scranton. The CMC, they talked about the community compensation and how they give back to the community, and that it includes $74 million. And I believe probably a huge portion of that is in uncompensated care. Well, that doesn't pay my DPW to pick up my garbage. I'm sorry about people who don't have insurance or that there's issues with that, but paying for someone's uncompensated care, whether they're from Scranton or Mayfield or Tunkhannock, that doesn't pay the salary of the DPW worker who provides services here in Scranton. I also thought that the ER was expanded in the past 10 years or so. I seem to recall a lot of construction. So I'm wondering why we have to do this all over again. I'm not saying that it's not needed, but I do question that. CMC also talked about absorbing the ER closure of Moses Taylor. We just had a new hospital open up in Dixon City. I would assume that they're going to be absorbing a portion of that as well. So the burden doesn't fall all on CMC. Again, I'm grateful for the time that has been spent on the revamp and listening to all of the concerns from the neighbors and the neighborhood associations. But I do think that you need to take into account that the changes that the CMC or that Geisinger is looking for, they can be modified. And the Hill Neighborhood Association and the neighbors in the Hill section that are directly affected by this change, they're willing to compromise. And I think that Geisinger has not been as forthcoming as we would like. Was brought up that a question was asked about, was it fully staffed? And I likened it to, instead of telling you the time, they told you how to build a watch. They gave you nothing. And that was frustrating for me to hear. Again, I do think the zoning ordinance needs to be passed, but I think it needs to be amended so that the 200 block of Colfax is restricted to the 45-foot height. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura.
Hi, I'm Dave Cawley. I'm a 24-year resident of 1724 Vine Street, and Geisinger is not a good neighbor. They tore down those houses. First snow came along, they did not clear the sidewalks. The city had to be called and told that they didn't do that. And then they finally came out and did that, and there were delays every time it snowed or there was ice or anything like that. We have asked about information about what they want to do. They have mostly ignored us or given us fluff like they gave you guys. You asked questions, they did not answer them. They asked about staffing. They said, well, it's kind of hard. We don't know if they're going to staff it at all. They want to put beds in. Beds make money. Parking spots don't make money, but they sure have a damn good plan for parking spots. But they won't tell you how many beds they're going to put in, or they tell you things that you want to hear, like they might say they're going to do some pediatrics or they're going to do geriatric care. But when you ask them, they don't have a plan. You have to give them a blank check in order for them to come up with a plan. I know a few of you folks are business people and in the construction industry. Somebody spends $3 million or so on buying houses and tearing them down, and they don't actually have a plan for what they're going to do, do you believe them, or do you think they're full of crap? That's the basic question. Show of hands, how many people on the council here think there's not a model sitting on a table in somebody's office in Danville? Okay, so no hands went up. So I'm assuming you don't believe them either when they say, oh, we don't have a plan. Because you wouldn't spend all that money if you did not have a plan. You're not going to buy 3 blocks of property and tear it down if you don't have a plan. They don't want to tell us what their plan is because they know we're not going to like the plan. Yes, we do need updated medical care. It would be nice if they showed us what the plan was and said, this is what we need to do. We're getting our asses handed to us by all the other hospitals that are moving into the area. We need to do something or we're screwed. Okay, be honest with us. Say, this is what we want to do. How can we make this not a nightmare for you, the people who have to live there? Simple thing. If you have a neighbor, which I'm sure you all do, you want to do something in your yard that might impact your neighbor. Like you want to put something up and you say, hey, Bob, I'd like to do this. It's going to obstruct your view or something like that. What can I do to make it better? That's what good neighbors do. They have not done any of that. They don't care about us. They have no interest in making our life better. They just want to add beds so they can add revenue. That's all this is. Our lives and our houses and decades of living in an area don't matter to them. Nobody who makes these decisions in Danville live in Scranton. They certainly don't live in the Hill section. And the few times we did talk to people at CMC, they gave us the guy who's in charge of facilities of the building up there. They could have just given us a janitor for all that mattered. That guy had no say. All he could say is, I don't know, I haven't seen any plans, because yeah, they haven't shown him any plans because he's not high enough to know anything. They just have not been good neighbors. They have not been forthcoming on anything. They have a plan. They haven't told you what the plan is, or maybe they did and you haven't told us. Either way, they have a whole lot of money that they're going to spend, and they don't care what the people who live there think or how they're going to impact our life. The only thing that can restrict them is the zoning. That's it. What you guys decide impacts our life. And whatever they put in the paper, whatever they put on TV, whatever they told you personally, it's probably a pile of crap because they know what you want to hear in order to get your vote for their plan, which they're not telling anybody about until they build it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Crowley.
Good evening. My name is Maggie Craig, and I live at 536 Colfax. Thank you, Council, for the opportunity to speak. I grew up in Dixon City, moved to New York City when I was 18, came back to the area during the pandemic, and just bought a house in the Hill section in January. And I love Scranton. I love the Hill section. I think Scranton's changed a lot in the past 5-10 years, partially thanks to leaders like yourselves. And, I also have a background. I'm a bartender in the Hill section and a writer, but I went to NYU for environmental studies with a focus in urban sustainability. And I think this idea that one neighborhood has to be diminished in order to serve the city as a whole just isn't necessarily true. I think there's a way to expand healthcare in the area as well as supporting the neighbors who live around Geisinger. And it just doesn't make sense to me that 60 feet on a parking garage would equate to less healthcare. And I don't think the information we were given today supports the need for a building that high. I don't think the question of why the parking garage needs to be that high was answered. And I'll leave you with this. I believe creativity flourishes within restrictions. And they said themselves today, Geisinger is great at thinking outside of the box. So you all get to determine what those restrictions are. And I feel confident that if those restrictions are in place, there's a way we can still have the health care that this community direly needs. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Maggie.
Good evening. My name is John Kevra, and I live at the 400 block of Arthur Avenue. Geisinger's presentation was very informative. It truly was the most information Geisinger has presented to concerned neighbors since the project was made known to us. However, we are all very familiar with the saying, talk is cheap. In no way, shape, or form have the citizens of Scranton seen real evidence that Geisinger is concerned with our city, our neighborhood, our largest city park, our museum, or our local economy. They have not shown any evidence of their commitment to anything but literally the bulldozing interest of Geisinger's uncompromising expansion. However, I can offer 9 concrete pieces of evidence that they are not concerned with the residents of Scranton. Number one, during their presentation, they mentioned medical facilities that are closing, but failed to mention the recent opening of the Lehigh Valley Hospital that is a formidable healthcare provider. Number two, also during their presentation, we heard expressions such as, I think, we feel. However, their slides were lacking the source information that is important when considering how accurate it is, something Dr. Fairchild, as an academic, could certainly appreciate. Number three, the initial meeting held 1 year ago was not an exchange of concerns and information. It was simply a presentation by 3 Geisinger employees of how we need more health care in Scranton, something no one doubted in the room and probably no one doubts in this room tonight. Number four, furthermore, the Scranton meetings with smaller groups were even more rhetoric than the initial meeting. The Geisinger employees had less concrete answers to our questions than they had for you tonight. Number 5, Mr. Barris said, we made a commitment to our neighbors. When? When? I have no idea when he made this commitment, and what is it? Once again, we have seen no evidence of those words they expressed tonight. Number 6, Geisinger is not willing to do the various studies such as traffic, sunshine, noise, etc., until the neighbors are held hostage to the proposed zoning changes. If they are truly committed to the neighbors, why are they not concerned about the quality of their lives and their safety? Number 7, in the presentation, they offered their unsourced information that supports their argument, but they can't tell us how many ER bays they will have, only that they currently have 38. I find that very hard to believe, that a $300+ million project, and they don't know where they're going, but yet they had all that information about the need for the growth. Number 8, they mentioned a hotline and flyer, never mentioned in the 2 meetings we had. If that were something that I were presenting supporting my argument and I were an employee of Geisinger, I would have given that 1-800 number its own slide to prove that they have it, so after this meeting, each one of you could have dialed it. And number 9, Geisinger's use of NAOG parking keeps the park safe, busier, and overall more user-friendly. Why would a concerned community member want to take this away? As the traffic moves from 7 o'clock shifts to 3 o'clock shifts to 11 o'clock shifts, there's police there, there's activity. If any of us remember the park from the 1970s where that activity was gone, it was more like a drug fest than a city park. So once again, concerned citizens would care about that. They would give that consideration. So what are my concerns based upon the lack of evidence that I have for Geisinger, and you should have as well? What if the studies that come after the zoning changes indicate that there's going to be problems with pollution? That's not just a problem the local neighborhood people will have, it's a problem everyone in this room will have. What about the noise? What about the traffic? Are they willing to change their plans? Something tells me once they have exactly what they want, they won't care what those studies say. How do we know they will really create a neighborhood council? Nothing in their behavior to date indicates that they are willing to do that. And how do we know that if they do create a neighborhood council, they'll listen to what we have to say? Once again, no evidence. They've offered no evidence, but I'm offering you 9 concrete bits of information as to how they cannot be trusted. So the question I pose to you is, are you putting Scranton first or Geisinger first? No one is saying they shouldn't grow. All they're saying is the way they're going about it is untrustworthy, it's unjust, and it's unfair, and it's up to you to vote to support the neighbors.
Thank you, Mr. Kevra.
Good evening. My name is Karen Sexton, and I live on the 200 block of Wheeler Avenue. I am here tonight representing my friend and former classmate, Sandy Mosier, who resides on Roseland Street and has asked me to read this letter on her behalf. Dear council members, as the current family member residing in the Mosier family home of the last 80 years on Roseland Street, with the ability to enjoy natural morning sunlight on our front porches and yards, a 100-foot parking garage that is being proposed for the corner of Roseland Street and Colfax Avenue will and would be a detriment to our neighborhood. The clean air and peaceful enjoyment of our neighborhood will be severely compromised, as we will be subjected to the following: 365 days, 24 hours, 7 days a week per year. No AM sunshine, excessive vehicle gas and exhaust fumes, beeping of vehicles locking and unlocking, vehicle alarms being activated, excessive lighting of garage penetrating bedroom windows, transients and vagrants using garage staircases for shelter, etc. Excessive traffic on Roseland Street, plus the potential abuse of the one-way street. Excessive speeders on Roseland Street. As you can see, there is nothing positive for our neighborhood. At this time, I would like you to imagine yourself in our situation being subjected to what you are contemplating of approving, being built across the street from your own home. If this is allowed to happen in this neighborhood, what and whose neighborhood is next? I implore the members of the council to consider our community's quality of life over the demands of Geisinger. Thank you for your consideration of these concerns. Sincerely, Sandra Mosier.
Thank you, Karen.
Good evening, Council. My name is Gary Scheckman. I live at 222 Colfax Avenue. My family bought our home in 1961, so we've been there about 62 years. I wanted to thank the members of the community who have been organized to help control what's been going on in the neighborhood. I know they've worked countless hours. I have to say that the reason why there's not a lot more people here tonight is because our opponents, or who we have to go up against, they have bulldozers. So basically, on my street, there's 4 homes left, 4 homes, I believe, on the 2 of Colfax. I'm a little confused. I hear about different zoning for half of the block, the other. I don't understand it, but I do understand that they want to put a 100-foot garage across the street. And I think the last speaker probably put it the best way. Like, how would you like it? How would you like it to wake up to a 100-foot garage? And I know there's a big concern these days about secondhand smoke. Can you imagine a garage that size right across the street from your home? It just doesn't seem right. So I can appreciate that the CMC has growth needs. God forbid we all get in situations we need the hospital, and thank God they're there. I'm just hoping that there's some accommodation that could be made for people who've spent their whole life in their neighborhood, have spent tens and hundreds of thousands of dollars in taxes, and to see what's happened is very disheartening, and I hope you'll consider what I've had to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Is there anyone else that would like to be heard?
Good evening, Council. Lee Morgan. I hope I could have got in here earlier and heard the discussion that was taking place, but it was kind of crowded. I'll watch it on ECTV, but I'd just like to say that I don't know how this fits in the SAPA plan, and I'm really concerned about spot zoning to benefit a development in the city at the detriment of the rest of the residents, because it smacks of politics. Now, I'm a firm believer that there's a lot of pay-to-play politics in this city, and not only do I believe it, but Mr. Gahan believes it, and he was council president here. And, I lived on the Hill from 16 on, lived right across from the University of Scranton. My grandmother lived in the Morton Apartments at that time, and I lived on the 400 of Monroe. And I watched what the university, and a lot of people aren't going to appreciate what I say here, but I watched the University of Scranton destroy the Hill and force families out of their neighborhoods. And just the only thing that's left standing there are the churches now. All the people that I grew up around, and they've been dispersed. Their families that lived in the city for generations are gone and forced out of their neighborhoods. And the social fabric of the neighborhood was destroyed. And I remember George Uhas, who lived on Mulberry Street there, being an advocate to save the Scranton State General Hospital. And I remember the surgeon there who was on Channel 16 talking about saving the state hospital because of its location in the city and its size and the amount of health care it could furnish. Not only did it at a drug treatment center, and we fettered all these things away. And now what we've come to is we've come to a Naog Park that's talking about building a pool and maybe the rec authority enhancing the park itself. But how will those plans be constrained by a major project like this hospital expansion? And, my heart goes out to the people here that live in those neighborhoods, because they're talking about money pushing them out of their neighborhoods and destroying the social fabric of their neighborhood. And I personally think myself that when the zoning maps were redrawn, they did it to hide the fact that they were going to do a lot of favors for Geisinger. And that's my own opinion. And I think, look, this all has to stop here today. And what Geisinger needs to do is it needs to go down into the heart of the city, maybe down by North Washington Avenue, where there's a lot of decay and a lot of open land, and build a hospital there. They've got plenty of money, and the state and the federal government are going to give them grant money. And build a hospital closer to the medical school. And let's start consolidating our assets in a way that makes some kind of common sense, instead of building a monstrosity on the top of the hill. And don't forget, we put choke points on Mulberry Street when we narrowed it. Okay, so it's not this wide open boulevard. Okay, it's not what it was when I was a kid. We've made very, very poor choices here, and we're about to make another one, because I think that this council needs to come forward, bring the zoning changes that they're going to make to this whole city, and show it to the residents to explain how this follows SAPA's plan that the city agreed to and how it benefits residents, and what kind of development they're actually talking about bringing into these areas, because I think we've lost the idea on what we want to create in this city. And I think that following a flawed plan is going to cause a lot of harm. And telling Geisinger that we don't support this plan even though you've invested money into it, we think you need to move your project. And take a look down at the lower hill where I'm talking about. It's vacant. There's a couple old factories there that are left that are empty, where Ralphie Weeks used to have his places, and others across the across that whole corridor down by the medical school. It's a development where you could build a helicopter pad, and you have a lot of room for expansion. It's right off the Central Expressway. It has a lot of wide avenues. There aren't a lot of neighborhoods down there, so noise wouldn't be a problem or pollution. And save the remnants of what's left in this neighborhood, because my neighborhood on the hill was destroyed by the University of Scranton. Okay, and I don't think we should just subject the people of Scranton to more harm. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan.
Joan Hodowanitz, 101 Penn Avenue, Scranton. I don't have much new to say, but I got to get up here and tell you, I came here tonight, I'm spending like hours and hours here, hoping to hear some specifics from Geisinger. When, remember, you said last week, well, we're going to bring him in and we're going to ask them questions, and you did. You asked them some pretty specific questions, and you got a lot of humma, blah, blah, blah. No yes or no answers, okay? And this whole explanation, well, you know, we can't really make specific plans until we know what the zoning ordinance is going to look like. Let me tell you something. If you didn't get a bad feeling tonight and see some red flags, you weren't listening. I know nothing about medicine. I know nothing about how to build a parking garage. But I do know when someone's a snake oil salesman, and it came very close tonight. The doctor was pretty good, but the CEO, you know, if he gives up his day job, he ought to go and become a politician. He's got all the qualifications. Never answered directly a question. For example, the slide that had the pilots, you know, they were going to talk about pilots and taxes and everything. They didn't really talk about it. I saw something up there about $600 million. And oh, you know, our people, our employees, and even our patients and our visitors, you know, they buy gas and they go to the restaurant or whatever, you know, kind of thing, $600 million. Let me tell you something. This whole concept of them as a not-for-profit, is that not a load of horse hooey? Do you think that CEO took a vow of poverty? Oh no, he's probably laughing all the way to the bank. It's clear in my mind that yes, we need improved health care in the city, and they do have to grow and they do have to expand, and technology has to advance and all that. You know, I don't argue that. We need doctors, we need nurses, we need to pay them a good wage, all of that, okay? But the fact that they wouldn't make any commitments, red flag. What about this thing I heard for the first time tonight about Bloomsburg and how they halted their plan down there? What's to prevent them from halting it here after you give them a green light with the zoning ordinance? What they want is for you to give them what they need, but they're not giving you any commitments. Oh no, because they're going to do the studies after the zoning ordinance. Then they'll find out what they can or cannot do. They didn't really want to talk about something like, why can't they, you know, maybe get another large satellite parking area somewhere in Scranton and use a shuttle service and get their employees to and from work? Why do they need to have 1,200 or 1,400 parking spaces? I'm not really sure I understood that concept where they wouldn't look at any other options. Okay, don't want to commit to an underground parking level until they do the studies, but they aren't going to do the studies until after the zoning ordinance is approved. Well, I just hope that, you know, I mean, they didn't give you some hard and fast answers tonight. You give them a green light next week. Okay, you better be prepared to live with what's going to happen the next 5 to 10 years, because I think the people are going to remember for a long, long time.
Thank you, Ms. Hodowanitz.
Tom Coyne, Manuka, Oak Avenue, Manuka. First of all, I'd like to address that we need to watch a closer attention to the starting clock, because when the lady in the leopard skin neck wrap was up here, when she started to speak, it was actually 3 minutes and 23 seconds on the clock. The clock had already been running, and she was stripped of 1 minute and 40 seconds of her speaking time. Now, for the health care, I'm not devoid of understanding of it. My grandmother was an RN in this city. She was an RN for 66 years. Yes, she was up in her 80s when she finally retired from being an RN. I remember her in the nursing homes, and she worked up at a place called Still Meadow, which was for disadvantaged children. My mother was an LPN. I understand the hardships that hospital workers go through. She, after dealing with patients and home patient care, and having patients eventually pass away because it was the end of life, it finally became too much of a burden for her, and she left nursing as an LPN to move in and become a lawyer. That tells you that with the law and going before the courts is sometimes easier, and going back to school for a law degree, than having to suffer the stresses of being a nurse in the system. I've worked in the industry for 16 plus years as a healthcare provider by providing equipment, IT, data analysis, and expertise on billing. I'm not devoid of an information on how a large organization like this runs. This main speaker referred to the council as Your Honor, and then he went off on monologues. Like good counsel, he dodged direct questions. In 2001, GMC provided more than $74 million in community benefits, including uncompensated care. That's all well and good, except by federal mandate, they're required as being a hospital to provide uncompensated care. It's not a gift, it's not a pilot, it's a requirement by federal law for them being a hospital. If they do not provide private care, they cannot be a hospital. So saying it's a pilot or any benefit like that is complete bunk. It's regulated for them for having the ability to be a hospital and to accept Medicare. It's disingenuous. Oh, and he's talked about people dropping off dry cleaning. I haven't seen very many dry cleaning places in the city. It must be a very elite crowd that goes up there that's worried about running to drop off their dry cleaning. Exit beeping from facilities. I don't understand why we have exit beeping, considering that Philadelphia and other major cities put flashing strobe lights outside the garage and warning signs that say stop for, flashing signs for pedestrians that say stop when someone is exiting. It's visible, it's clear, and it's not a noise producer. I don't know why we need beeping on a garage when a ground level flashing strobe light takes care of the situation without noise. They say that doctors and nurses, well, you have to wait for sometimes over 8 hours. And the lady, she had this abdominal issue, and then they had to revive her after 5 hours of waiting there. Well, maybe if they, under their triage, if they are unable to take care of the patients in a timely manner, they should coordinate with other hospitals to transport to hospitals that are not overburdened. Because having someone in the hospital for 8 hours, risking them as an emergency patient, is insane. If you're beyond capacity, do not be beyond capacity. Triage and transport the people out of there who can be transported. And the newspaper wrote an article about the backlog of dialysis patients. Well, considering they have a large property that they wanted a 100-foot down near the school, where they want to put in another building, that's the perfect place to put a dialysis and all that scheduled services, so that they don't need to expand as much up there, because they can take scheduled services that are now in the hospital, complicating it, and moving it to another place that is not impacted. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Coyne. Is there anyone else who'd like to be heard?
I'm Joe Blakiewicz, live on Far Street, Vice President of the Trip Park Civic Association, Executive Board Member of the Bull's Head Weston Field Neighborhood Association. I come here tonight to stand with our neighbors and friends in the Hill. Neighborhoods built this city. The houses were there long before Geisinger had expanded. Geisinger is not going anywhere. The tradesmen who are here talking about their jobs, they do tremendous work. They're still going to have work. What this council needs to do is to take care of the many, not the few or the one. These people here voicing their concern need you to hear their concern, listen to their concern, and take the appropriate action and vote for the people, not for Geisinger. When they were building the Isaac Tripp School, the neighbors had some issues. We opened the doors of the community center. We had them come in. We had school board members come in. Issues were solved. There was a problem with the baseball field. It's not there no more. You know, that's what neighborhoods do, working with people who want to make change. Down in Bull's Head, they needed people to manage that flood project, not just Weston Field and Bull's Head. They went all the way over to the plot in Lower Greenridge when they wanted to expand and bring North Scranton Junior High School back to life. Who wrote the letters? We did, because the neighbors were concerned, and as neighbors, we stick together. What I'm here tonight is to ask this council to take those friendly amendments that were made a few weeks back by Mr. Schuster, seconded by Mr. McAndrew, died on a 3-2 vote to not to move those forward, put them back on the table tonight, because as Mr. McAndrew said, from that wall to that wall is 2 levels of a parking garage. What Mr. Schuster said tonight is, let's put those amendments in and let them come before the 5 members of the zoning board and ask for a variance. If they prove the variance by the rules, then let's go with that. But we cannot allow this to happen, for this height to impact these people's lives who built these properties for many, many years, because remember, NIMBY, not in my backyard, might be coming in your backyard when they want to put something bigger in your neighborhood. So I'm asking you here tonight to take into consideration what Mr. McAndrew and Mr. Schuster said, put those amendments on the table, vote them, and then next week pass it 3-2, because if you don't take the amendments, these people are going to suffer, all the neighborhoods are going to suffer. You can take that out of 8th order tonight, put it there, it'll pass 3-2, and this has all been an exercise in futility. So I ask you to consider that. Take the people's voice first, because the people need to be heard. And the people built our city, not Geisinger. The people are going to stay, and Geisinger's not going anywhere. So I implore you to do that tonight and make sure these people at least have a voice. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Blakiewicz.
Edmonds Kakiti, Arthur Avenue. I wasn't going to speak tonight, Mr. King, until you said something for the first time that encouraged me for all the times I've appeared here before this body. And that is when you suggested about extending the garage on Colfax Avenue to 75 feet. to allow for a reduction on the garage on the 200 block of Colfax. It was interesting in the context of Mr. Beer's comment that they love surface parking. They have surface parking. You asked him to give you a figure on how many parking spaces that would create. I hope they can do that, and I hope if they don't do that, you wait to decide what you're going to do with the zoning ordinance. But in addition to that, I would ask you to ask Mr. Beer, with a 45-foot garage on the 2 of Colfax, coupled with the 45-foot garage on the 4 of Colfax, and the park, how many spaces do they have? None of the neighbors here are throwing them out of the park. We like having them there for some of the reasons that you heard earlier: safety, security, activity. It's a good thing. The city's not going to want to have to just look at 7 acres of blacktop if they move out of there. What are you going to do? You're going to spend thousands and thousands of dollars going in there, rip up the blacktop and make it a green space? That's never going to happen. Never going to happen. So you have the authority to pick up the phone, essentially, and say, look, this is what we want to do. Stay in the park. Build the 45-foot garage in the 2 of Colfax and the 4 of Colfax, and everything from a parking standpoint will be addressed. It is not a major give back. The neighbors who are here this evening agreed months ago to back off our request that it remain strictly residential to the compromise, some of which is part of what's before you as the amendments to the zoning ordinance. As a legal lesson, if we can't resolve this as responsible, intelligent people, we're going to have a decision by this board which will be appealed then to the zoning hearing board. And the zoning hearing board will then get an opportunity to decide whether or not it's a spot zoning issue. And depending on what the zoning board does, there's an appeal to the Commonwealth Court of Pennsylvania. So instead of having a project or a SAPA ordinance that's finally resolved within a matter of weeks, this situation could hang on 18 months, 24 months, 30 months, until all appeals are exhausted. And that 18-month window that Mr. Beer talked about before they even turn a shovel is now 5 years out. So let's use some common sense here. Let's protect the people who put you where you are, who pay for you to sit here and to listen to us. You don't get that from Geisinger. You get that from us. And we'll remember how this vote goes when it's all said and done. Because those of you who want to repeat performance on the council will have to come back to the voters for their help. And you see tonight, not only from this group, but from the other neighborhood groups, that there's support for that amendment. If you don't pass the amendment, please understand that if there's an appeal that's resolved in favor of the neighbor's spot zoning argument, it doesn't go back to this proposed compromise. It goes back to residential. So for all the time and effort and money spent in this thing, fighting over 60 feet of garage, this project could be delayed for years, and eventually it could turn out that some higher court decides that it was or is spot zoning, and it doesn't come back to 45-foot garages, it comes back to residential zoning. So I think this is a lot to think about. There's a lot at risk here for everybody. But the compromise that we've already asked to be considered, only to have it rebuked by this 100-foot garage in the 2 of Colfax, it's not a leap of faith for Geisinger to take the 45-foot garage. Keep the park. Ask them how many spaces they will have with those 2 garages and the park, and I'm sure it's going to be at or near what they're saying they're going to have by drawing all their employees out of the park, which they're never going to do anyway. And then we're left with 7 acres of blacktop and nothing to do with it. I don't remember any more traveling circuses coming around, so I don't think there'll be much that you're going to do with that area. They're using it. We don't mind they're using it. There's a benefit to the city. That is the compromise, and that is the role that this council can play in resolving this thing to everybody's satisfaction. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Scranton. Is there anyone else who would like to be heard? Hearing none, I'll seek a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
This public hearing is adjourned. We'll take a 3-4 minute break before we begin the council meeting.